IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Hey, that's Ryan Roberts. You know that dude. I'm Brian Driscoll. It's Friday. It means it's mailbag time. And what that means basically is today, you guys determine the topics that we're going to talk about. So, Ryan, we've already got a bunch of questions already started. So there's maybe half of them are John A. ones. So we'll have to try to mix them up with just a lot of great questions. And so, Ryan, we'll just dive right in, man, because we're just going to get rocking and rolling. Obviously, we know some of the topics that are going to be discussed today are going to be hot and heavy, but we got a lot of other things too, including some draft stuff. So anything Notre Dame related, recruiting, team, whatever, anything college football related, let's rock and roll.
Let's do it.
We're going to kick off with a super chat from Carolina Irish. Thank you very much. With that question, and Ryan, I'm gonna kind of kick this one off, and then we'll kind of go back and forth. But at what point in an offensive coach's career does he start to develop a playbook? I consider Reese a special case since he played in the same head coach as he ended up OCing for. What about young guys? Well, I'll say this: Tommy Reese kind of had his own playbook,
right?
This past year, especially. But, I mean, look, it's something that you develop over the course of your career. I'll speak for myself, Ryan. I started working on my playbook when I was in high school. And then it developed in college, and then it developed more. And it doesn't just come from who you play for. A lot of what Tommy Reese does is from studying the NFL. I mean, that's kind of where he is. And that's partly why he's taking the path that he's taking, potentially taking to Alabama, because of the fact that it has set up multiple coaches to be coordinators in the NFL.
Sure.
You look at Brian Dable, you look at Bill O'Brien. I mean, Steve Sarkisian went from quarterbacks coach with the Alabama to the OC of the Falcons, and then came back as OC to Alabama. Now he's the head coach of Texas. So you're just whatever game, whatever teams you respect, whatever style you have, you're going to follow those teams and try to get ideas for those teams, and then kind of mold your little wrinkles and things you like into it.
Well, and I was going to say, Brian, is that the great thing about football is it never really stops, right? Like this game is just ever evolving. So it's like Tommy Reese's playbook right now, it's not going to be the same thing as Tommy Reese's playbook next year or the year after. There's going to be new things, new plays installed. There's going to be new wrinkles. There's going to be new formations, new ideas, new adjustments off of plays. Like that's the great thing about football, everyone, for me, is that you never can know enough because things are always changing. Right. I mean, you're seeing it every single year as far as, just not even just the style of offenses, but just the things that you can do out of it, the adjustments defensively, some personnel that you can use in certain different defensive schemes to run sub packages. And that's what I love about football is that it's literally a chess match because things are constantly evolving and you have to be a step ahead. That's why I love the game so much.
Your principles don't change as a coach, but how you go about executing those principles does change. Now, I think some concepts are universal and stand the test of time, but how you do them will change. So, like, there's teams that are running inside zone, and coaches have been running inside zone for 20 years. But how they teach it, how they scheme it, how all those type of things will evolve and change over the time. Hey, look, we used to do this with a fullback. For example, when I first started coming up with my playbook, I've always been an inside zone guy. I was a Broncos fan. And what was the scheme, Ryan, that brought us a couple Super Bowls? It was zone,
outside zone,
with Alex Gibbs. Inside, outside zone with Alex Gibbs. With those great Terrell Davis teams with Mike Shanahan. And so when I first got started, if you remember those Broncos teams, their base personnel package was 21. Ed McCaffrey, Rod Smith, the receiver, Shannon Sharp at tight end, Howard Griffith at fullback, and then Terrell Davis at tailback. And so you'd run a lot of split zone out of that where, you'd have the tight end going to one side, blocking backside, the fullback going to another. Sometimes they would run sort of like a lead zone where they would run to the open side with the tight end backside. They would block it a little bit differently on the edge, and then they would have the fullback leading up through the so I was a 21 personnel inside zone guy. Well, then it kind of evolved. And when I got into coaching, I was more of an 11 personnel zone guy. And I mean, we weren't running RPOs, but we were running pre-snap check type of RPOs, Ryan, back when I was coaching. And when I got hired as a pass game coordinator at Christopher Newport, that's one of the things we did is we went to more 11 personnel and we would throw like bubble screens and things like that. So if that guy was, the overhang was cheating inside, we'd check and throw like a bubble or throw something like that, right? And so when we do like little different motions and stuff like that, because now I was still an inside zone guy. We're running inside zone, and but just how you get to it evolves. And then the read zone becomes a thing, and that adds a different wrinkle to it. But it's still inside zone. The rules may change a tad, but it's still inside zone. You may work on different drills as you evolve over time, but it's still inside zone.
Right.
And so there's concepts that I think stand the test of time, Ryan, but even those are going to evolve and change. And if you're not willing to not only adapt, but also the best coaches are the ones who are sort of the ones setting the trends. Somebody had to be the first one to really make RPOs a thing. Somebody had to be the first one to really dive into inside zone for it to eventually become a thing, right? It was Sid Gilman and then Bill Walsh who sort of implemented, or excuse me, Paul Brown and then Bill Walsh who kind of brought the West Coast offense alive to then where it dominated the NFL. But somebody had to be the innovator that kind of brought that out. And it was Lavelle Edwards at the college level that sort of brought his version of the West Coast offense to the table and why they were putting up monster numbers back in that Ty Detmer era. So somebody's got to be innovative. And so you can be innovative with a brand new scheme, or you can be innovative in that we're going to run stuff that other people run, but here's some things that I like about it that we're going to do differently with our personnel that no one's really doing that I think will work. And sometimes that stuff works and sometimes it doesn't.
Yep.
I think the best coordinators are the ones who are kind of forward thinkers and not just repeating what everybody else does. Because if you start repeating what everybody else does, that means defenses are already starting to work on answers. And it's not going to last as long. So those are all different things that I look at when it comes to putting a playbook together.
Well, and you mentioned like 21 personnel with the Broncos, like 21 personnel with how we want Notre Dame to run it today is a lot different than that, right? Like we're not talking about a fullback anymore. We're talking about using two true running backs in the backfield as well. So wrinkles always change, and how you adjust to it on the other side of the football always obviously adjusts as well, right? Because I can't defend. If I'm a defense, I can't look at a 21 personnel formation with a fullback and be like, oh, that's the same as if they have Chris Tyree and Logan Diggs in the game, right? Like you can't treat it the same. That's why, again, the game is ever evolving, and that's why there's context to everything, and why we can't just put numbers on things, because there's wrinkles that you throw in there that they just far exceed what the numbers tell you, type of thing, if that makes sense. So I think that those wrinkles off of different personnel packages even today are why the game is just becoming so much more in depth and so much more kind of, I don't want to call it chaotic, but like it can be chaotic at times. It's very interesting how how you see things evolve over time.
Let's go to this next question, Ryan. So that's one from Carolina Irish. We'll go to Tommy Guns here with one. Were either of you able to get a short list of guys you think might be upgrades should Coach Reese go? And I'm bringing this up because we're not going to necessarily dive into it today, because we're not going to really dive into our specific list until we finished diving into the film and seeing if it would fit. Like Ryan and I were working on a list last night, and there was a guy on there that we were both very high on as a young coach, but it's like, but because of the position he would be involved in, it just doesn't work. It doesn't fit with the current personnel. And so there's a couple guys like that, for example, that you're like, hey, I love that guy as a coordinator, but I don't think it fits here because of the way that the current staff is made up, and you don't want to change the staff in that regard. That guy's not good enough to make the changes that we'd have to make for that guy to take over. And so there's some of that stuff, but also I don't really – look, I'll address specific people you guys bring up, but we're going to hold off on kind of putting our list out until Tom Reese just makes his decision, or at least makes his decision known. And so I don't want to go there. I'll respect your specific questions about it if there's a guy you want to talk about. And there's a lot of that already in the chat that we'll get to on specific guys. But I don't necessarily have a list just yet. We will have one. If Tom Reese leaves, I promise you we will have a written article about that, and we'll address that in our podcast. Our next podcast in regard to guys that we think Notre Dame should go for. Yep. And that's the thing, is when we talk about who we think Notre Dame should go for, that's our opinion. That's not something that Notre Dame is maybe looking at. And we'll be very sure to specifically say if this is a Notre Dame target or not. So if you hear us talking about a coordinator today, it's not someone that Marcus Freeman has told me he's looking at, or somebody else in the Notre Dame program has told me they're looking at. This is our opinion. And if it's ever a situation where we're reporting what we know is from a source, we'll say we've heard that so-and-so is a guy that Notre Dame is going to look at. But right now, we're not going to do that. It's not that we're against it, Tommy. It's just that's a better conversation to have at a different time when there is a decision that has been made.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's out of respect to Coach Reese too, right? Because he's still the offense coordinator at Notre Dame until he's not anymore, right? So decision that has not been made. So we're going to honor that, and then if it happens, then we'll talk a lot about it, I'm sure.
Right.
So
absolutely. John A1 with a question. Which young defensive lineman stepping up could both boost the D-line need-wise as well as be an impact player in 2023? His options are Jason Onye, Tyson Ford, Donovan Heinisch, Aiden Gobira, and Josh Burnham. My list would have 2 guys on that. Ryan,
okay.
Let's say you. As far as being stepping up, filling need, and being an impact guy.
Yeah. I mean, the first guy, that's Josh Burnham, because we just talked about him so much, right? Like, I expect him to be a part of the Viper rotation, and I think that you need that type of length, athleticism, and versatility. Jason Onye is an interesting one, John. I mean, ultimately, man, I need somebody with size to step up, right? So I would even put Gabriel Rubio on that list, even though we saw Gabriel Rubio this year a decent amount. I would still include him on this list because it's not like he was a starter or got starter reps, right? Like we saw maybe like 10, 15, maybe 20 snaps occasionally last season. So I would even include Gabriel Rubio. So Gabriel Rubio, Jason Onye, a guy that could play nose, and then Joshua Burnham's the guy that I really want to see, kind of at that Viper position. But I really think that Notre Dame needs to try to find some consistent size. You don't need a Gabriel Rubio to be a 50 snap a game guy, but you do need him to play a decent amount of snaps because he brings a size profile that you just don't have at nose really right now.
For me, Ryan, it's of the guys provided, it's Burnham and Tyson Ford. I think both of those guys have impact talent. Aiden Gobira, to me, is probably still a year away from that standpoint. Those are the 2 guys that flash the highest ceilings to me. But I will say this, as far as being an impact guy, I'm very much looking forward to seeing what Jason Onye can do this spring. I am. He's got great size. He's got length. He's athletic. Is he a natural football player? We'll find out, right? He's still very new to football. I mean, this kid's only been playing football for 4 years. That includes his 2 years at Notre Dame because he lost a very important year of development as a senior in high school because of the COVID stuff in his state. So he's still very young. The light may go on someday. It may not. But if the light goes on, he's going to be a good football player, in my opinion. I really believe that. Will he be an impact player? Potentially, Ryan. I mean, I gave him a 4.5-star upside grade. Now, he had a much lower original grade, but he was one of those boomer bust kind of guys.
Yeah.
That I really felt could become an impact player at the next level. It's hard to say that because we haven't seen it, but he's got a lot of tools as well. So it's a good list. I mean, and I think that's kind of where the coaching better step it up because I don't want to hear excuses about how Notre Dame lacks talent on the defensive line. If Notre Dame's defensive line isn't good this year, I don't want to hear crap about how young it is or how inexperienced it is or there's not a lot of talent. Bull pucky, right? There is. It's about whether or not you can develop that talent. That's the question.
Yes.
Right? That's the only question that I have is can you develop that talent? Can you coach it up? Can you get the most out of those guys? You got the strength program to make it happen, Ryan. Do you have the defensive line coaching and the coordinating to make it happen? Different question. And that's where they have a lot to prove because Al Washington is not working with look, the dude's trying to push some kids on scholarship out, right? Okay, so why are you doing that if you don't think you have a lot of dudes, right? So, there's no excuses this year. He's got to step up and get the job done. And I hope that he does, but he's got to do a much better job in 2023 than he did in 2022. And it's not just coaching the older players. It's you got to coach the whole roster. And that's something I think Al Washington did a very bad job of this year, as did Al Golden.
Yeah. Well,
that's got to change.
And I would say the previous staff with Mike Elston, that's something that he did pretty well at, right, Brian? Like he took guys that are maybe a little raw. Like I think about Adi Ogundeji for one, right? Where he got a lot out of those types of guys, right? I think that Mike Elston was a good developer of talent at the defensive line spot. So you need that out of this because like you said, I mean, if anybody's seen Jason Onye in person, that kid's an impressive looking cat, man. He can move too. Like he's talented. You've talked about Tyson Ford in the past. That kid's talented. Aiden Gobira is very talented. Joshua Burnham's talented. Donovan Heinisch is talent. You just named, John, right there, 5 talented football players. And if you can't get something out of 5 talented football players, there's time for some self-evaluation that needs to happen, or evaluation from someone else outside of yourself, right? So there's no reason that you can't look at that group and say, I could probably get at least something out of 2 of those guys in 2023 to be at least contributors. Again, high impact, probably not, but be contributors and be important pieces. Yeah, I think you can find some guys in that group.
I do want to say this because we have a question about it. Somebody said, Brian, I didn't think you were drinking Dew anymore because I'm using one of my cups that's normally a Dew cup. This is actually one of the smoothies I was talking about. So it's a raspberry, blueberry, I think strawberry, and banana smoothie. So it's just those fruits frozen in milk. And I think my wife puts like a little bit of protein powder in there, but I'm not sure if this one has that or not. But yeah, I'm drinking a smoothie. See? So no Dew. I'm holding strong.
You slip some Dew on the side.
Yeah, I would. You know how gross that would be?
That would be really gross.
I don't like Dew that much. It's the sweet, you know what I mean? Like,
ooh.
I did slip up a little bit this past weekend when I was out of town in Ohio when it came to Dew. But yeah, since I've been home, I've been back on track and no Dew. So, but thank you for your concern and challenging me. It was Sean Kelly who asked that. So I appreciate that attempt at chastisement because I like that. It's about accountability. No, I'm being serious. Like, I like that accountability. And I can't express to you how much it meant to me. I was telling my wife about this, that there was a lot of people in the chat really encouraging me, hey, get healthy, do these things. And it meant a lot. It really meant a lot. So I do appreciate that very, very much. We have one here from Scott L. Are all 3 of the worst recruiters Notre Dame has on the defensive side of the ball Golden, Washington, and O'Leary? How would you rank Notre Dame's coaches as recruiters from worst to best? Ryan, I don't think he's wrong. I mean, I guess I didn't really think
I would
about it
I would probably
way.
word it a little differently, but yeah, I don't disagree.
I wouldn't. I mean, let's be honest. None of those 3 recruited up to par this year. None.
I agree with that.
None of them. They were all substandard recruiters this year. So yeah. So anyway, the question, Ryan. Yeah, I think we would agree that the 3 least effective recruiters on the staff.
Yes, that's where I was going for. Was least effective.
Ryan's trying to be nice. He's trying to be nice. He's trying to be nice to you, Scott.
Well, I just don't want anybody to ever be like, the worst member of Irish Breakdown is Ryan Roberts. I'm just the least effective.
Well, A, that's false, and B, it's kind of like, yeah, that is a good point. Like, you could have, like who was the worst member of the Fab Five? Well, they were all pretty good players. Somebody has to be worst if you're going to use that definition. Exactly. But I think in this instance, though, it fits because I do think, I mean, what has Al Golden done on the recruiting show? This is what I pay you to do, Ryan. How often do you hear his name in regard to him talking to players?
If the player names multiple coaches, defensive recruits might get to him by the 3rd name, most likely. So they'll usually start with the position coach that is recruiting them. Then Marcus Freeman is always named, obviously, and then Al Golden is usually named 3rd off that list. So not great, man. Not great.
Yep. It's not good. How would you rank Notre Dame's coaches as recruiters from worst to best? Honestly, I don't really look at it like that, Scott. It's a fair question, but the way I do is I group it into 3 categories. It's the guys that are really dominating, the guys that are getting the job done, and then the guys that are not getting the job done. Because getting the job done means you're doing a good job. Maybe there's room for improvement. You're doing a good job. I guess you could put as a 4th category sort of incomplete. And right now, that's where I put Jared Parker because it's still just hard to – I mean, he came into a situation where they already had their 23 class filled. He's got an early commitment from a guy that I view as a top 200 player, which is a nice start. But now let me see if you can close on Carter Nelson or Walter Matthews or Jaden Riddell. I mean, I need to see you close on those guys because this is really his first full cycle. So it's hard for me to evaluate a guy on a cycle where he really had nothing to do. It's a little different than Al Golden because Al Golden, even though he didn't have any linebackers necessarily to go out and get because they already knew who they wanted, and he did have a role in Jaden Osbury's recruitment. I wouldn't call him the driving force behind it, but he played his role. You don't hear his name mentioned enough with defensive recruits as a whole. Like, we always hear Chad Bones' name mentioned. We always hear Tom Reese's name mentioned with offensive recruits. You hardly ever hear Al Golden's name mentioned in any kind of way other than like in passing, and that's something's got to get better.
Jaden Osbury is a good example of someone that did talk heavily about Al Golden, like without being prompted to it. So that is one good area. Right. You just need a lot more of those. Right.
The issue there was the relationship was already established. He just had to come in and sell his defense. And that's fine, and that's what he was needed. But a big part of this now with the 24 class is you've got to be part of the relationship establishing aspect as well. Yeah. I know Al Golden can recruit. I know he can. He used to be really good at it. The question is, does he want to recruit? That's the question. And if he does, he'll be fine. And look. Here's the thing. I've spent a lot of time being critical of Al Golden. Part of it is because I have high expectations for Al Golden, because I think I do believe he's a very smart football coach. I know that he's a good position coach when he wants to be, and I know he's been a good recruiter in the past when he wants to be. I just can get concerned that some of his offers that he has been pushing for have been a little bit lazy, to be honest with you. Those low-hanging fruit kids that are easy to get, instead of saying, hey, yeah, that's a nice player, but we've got to push for this guy. Well, but you got to battle Ohio State and Alabama. Then so be it. You're going to lose 19 out of 20 of those battles, but the one you win is going to be a darn good football player. And so you can recruit both. It doesn't have to be either or. And that's what I get tired of is, well, you're going to lose all those 5-stars, so just don't recruit them. Well, they've gotten some, though. And if you don't fight for any of them, then you're not going to get any of them. You got to fight for them knowing you're going to lose most of those battles. But when you win them, it's worth it. And that's kind of where I want to be. Like, look, Chancey Stuckey lost some recruiting battles last year. He lost to Carnell Tate. He went after Noah Rogers, couldn't get any traction there. They went after Brandon Innocent, couldn't get any traction there. I mean, kind of list. They went after Jalen Hale, couldn't get any traction there.
Ronnie
There's
Gallagher.
A list of guys, right, that they lost, but he was going after nothing but big fish. So when he did land guys, he still got big fish. Yes. And so at the end of the day, he still put together one of the best recruiting classes in the entire country. Because you're going to lose those battles. The question is are you fighting enough of them that when you do win them, you're getting difference makers? And that's where we're at. I mean, look, Dylan McCullough lost some recruiting battles, right? Sure. He wanted Richard Young, didn't get him. But he was shooting for studs. I mean, that's why they moved on from Cedric Irvin Jr. And guess what they got? They got a stud, right? And so I think that's kind of where I'm at, Ryan, is you've got to shoot for the big fish. And knowing you're going to lose a lot of those battles and go get them. If you're not willing to fight for those guys, then this isn't the place for you, in my opinion. And that's the stance Coach Freeman needs to have. That doesn't mean you only fight for those guys. Also, go out and find those sleepers. Go find the Brandon Hillmans. Go find the Armel Mookums. Go find the Boubacar Traores as
Smiths.
well. Bingo. Yeah. Caleb Smith as well. But it's got to be that balance, right? Yep. Not every recruit has to be Charles Jagasaw. But I also don't want all 5 O-line recruits to be Joe Otting. It's got to be that balance. And I think they've found it at some positions. Now Coach Gold needs to find it. Coach Washington needs to find it. And if they can, then they're going to be just fine. They're going to be just fine. But the guys that to me are thriving, it's Coach Stuckey, Mike Mickens, Coach Heastan, Coach McCullough, and that's kind of my thriving group right there. The guys that are just kind of getting the job done. I think Chris O'Leary's kind of just doing an okay job, just kind of doing his job, not thriving, but not being bad with this most recent class. And then the guys that aren't getting it done is you got to throw Al Washington, Al Golden into that category, in my opinion. Brian Mason's another guy that I don't quite know what his role is as a recruiter when it comes to high school prospects, but they've been scouring the country. They've got some really good walk-ons. So how you evaluate him as Ryan is completely different. He's looking for the walk-ons because their strategy seems to be we're going to be very picky with giving scholarships out to high school specialists. So your job is to find that kid that can get the job done, but also comes from a family that can afford to pay for him to go to Notre Dame. Your job is to scour the transfer portal and find that Ivy League kid who's willing to come here and punt for us on his own dime, which is what they've now done 2 years in a row.
Right.
So it's a little different animal for him. And so he's kind of in a category all by himself, in my opinion. Ryan, I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, I think that the one good thing about the majority of the staff, because again, we're talking about 2 coaches that we feel like are not up to snuff, right, for the most part. And, obviously Chris O'Leary needs to get better. There's no doubt. He still has questions he needs to answer. But for the majority, the one thing that I do like, and I use Chancey Stuckey as the example all the time, it's like, yeah, he's going after the elite players. It wasn't like you missed out on Brandon Innes and Cardinal Tate, so now we're going to go to Braylon James, right? Like Braylon James was a part of that net. Like that's an elite player, according to the staff, right? You set the net, but then also you keep evaluating. You keep finding those players. And I mean, we talked about the preferred walk-ons that Notre Dame got in 2023 even, Brian. It's like to get a Luke Tolich out of Wyoming that had Pac-12 offers, like that is phenomenal, man. Great job by the staff to identify
the Jordan
a kid.
Faison kid's another one.
Jordan
Henry
Faison.
Garrity.
Yeah.
And they're bringing in some legit good football players
that had again, Jordan Faison had a offer from Iowa. Luke Tolich had an offer from Utah, from Washington State. Henry Garrity had some interest and had multiple Division I offers. Like you're finding players.
And he would have more if his last name wasn't Garrity.
Sure.
Let's be honest about that. Because once he commits to Notre Dame, you're like, okay, his dad played in the NBA, so you know he can afford to send his kid to Notre Dame. He's a Notre Dame legacy. We're not getting that kid. I mean, that may not be fair, but once it came out that he was looking at Notre Dame as a walk-on, it's like, okay, we're not gonna waste our time there because he doesn't need the scholarship. He's gonna go play at Notre Dame.
Yes.
So, I mean, to your point though, Ryan, he'd be another one that would have, I think, some Power 5 offers if it wasn't for the fact his last name was Garrity and he had already kind of committed to be a walk-on at Notre Dame. If his name was Henry Johns and nobody knew who he was, right? Like who his dad was just some guy, trying to help his kid get to college, and he wasn't some former pro basketball player who went to Notre Dame, then he'd probably have a different offer list to your point. So it's an impressive group. It really is.
I just think it's so different, Brian, because I mean, I'll be honest, like over the last few years, like I see some of the kids that are walk-ons for Notre Dame, and I'm just like, it's an okay player, but like Luke Tolich is going to be a completely different looking preferred walk-on than what's usually walking at Notre Dame, man. Like that's, again, I honestly, and I think we may have talked about this, but when the whole Peyton Bowen saga went crazy, was going crazy, right? I wouldn't have been shocked if they were just like, Luke, we're actually going to give you a scholarship and you're one of the scholarship safeties. Like I wouldn't have been shocked. I think the kid's really talented. I do.
Oh, he won't be a walk-on for very long.
I don't think so, man. I really don't. I mean, like that.
I'd be surprised.
Would you be surprised, even though he's a walk-on freshman, if he came in and he was on special teams at some point this year and kind of getting his earn a little bit? Like
a little bit, only because of the way that they handled it this past year, where they didn't even put like Jalen Sneed and Nolan Ziegler and Josh Burnham on special teams. That'd be the only reason why, Ryan, not because of him. It wouldn't surprise me because of him. It would surprise me because he's a freshman, right? So if they decide to go a young route and no. If you've got him and Alsbury and Drake Bowen all out there and Preston Zinner all out there, wouldn't surprise me if they decide to go that route. So my only surprise would come has nothing to do with Luke Tolich. It's just they didn't throw those freshmen out there as much next year. Here's the only caveat that I would throw in there, Ryan. Yeah. From a talent standpoint, agree with you 100%. 100% that kid can go down and cover kickoffs right now.
Yes.
Right now.
Yep.
But I'd want to save the year of eligibility.
That's fair.
That'd be my only thing from a roster development standpoint. Because then you still get 4 years out of him after this year. Let him get a year of building up his weight, because I think he's going to eventually move down closer to the ball.
I think so.
And so I want to have a year where I can build his body up, because I don't necessarily need him on special teams this year. I want to get 4 more. I want to get 4 years of him playing or 5 years of him being a part of this program is the direction I'd want to go if I'm Notre Dame.
And he could be easily, I mean, to your point, he could be a 6'3", 210, 250-pound rover before too long, right?
By his sophomore year.
Exactly.
I mean, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep. So that would be the reason I would say no to that one. Is because of that. But again, none of that has anything to do with Luke Talich's talent or ability to do the job.
You know what's funny though is that some first team offensive players all year are going to be like, darn, dude, can that Tolich kid just chill out on scout team defense here? Can he just chill? Like, he just knocked me out. It's supposed to be thud right now, and he just knocked me on my butt in team, right? And that's just going to be that type of kid. And you need those kids, man, to give them looks. I mean, could you imagine, even though Jordan Faison is playing, even though he's going to play slot receiver at Notre Dame, Navy week leading up to the first week of the season, throw him in at some triple option quarterback? Like, heck yeah. I mean, that kid literally did that in high school. So
right. Absolutely. Oh, good. Very, very good question, Scott. It sparked some very good conversation. Let's get down here. Actually, I did want to bring up a comment here real quick from Lucas Deason. Lucas said 1 year anniversary today as an IB YouTube viewer. Happy anniversary, Lucas. Welcome. Well, not welcome, but we're grateful. Very grateful. Been a good year. Love the content you guys are pushing out and the growth within the channel. Props to Ryan and his new draft show first episode. So YouTube had some funkiness going on last night, so we didn't get it up until probably like around 11 or so, but it is out. It's on the CFB Nation channel. Ryan's first draft show was very well done. It was obviously a breakdown of some of the risers of the Senior Bowl, and then also we answered some draft questions. Now, keep in mind, when we put stuff out on CFB Nation, it is not a Notre Dame-centric show.
Right.
But there will be some times where we do talk about Notre Dame's prospects because they have some important draft prospects. But definitely go check that out, Ryan. It was very excellent work. And, of course, Lucas, thank you very, very much for being with us and for everyone else that's being with us.
You know, my wife made fun of me, though, for that because she was like, you talked by yourself for 45 minutes. I'm like, yes, I did. I did do that.
But see, you're envisioning the audience on the other side. It's not just that you're talking to yourself, but it can be a little weird. It can be a little weird. And then you look at it and like, yes, and I got paid for it. That's what you say.
Right, right.
That's right. Here we go. Jordan Pinero says, and thank you, Jordan. He says, have we heard anything about how Justin Scott's recruitment has progressed? Any timelines on he will eventually commit somewhere?
No timelines right now, Jordan. I mean, obviously, he was supposed to make a college decision on the 31st. Everything, and honestly, we'd heard this from multiple sources, including directly from Justin himself through Sean Davis, that Justin just felt like he was just making too rush of a decision, right? Like that's all ultimately where it came down to. We still haven't changed our opinion on where Notre Dame stands right now, obviously, right? But there's obviously a lot of work to do, because now there is no official timeline. I still expect it not to last straight past maybe the next couple months, but I expect Justin to also make a couple visits to a couple schools, right? And to see things and to make a really, really informed decision when he ultimately does pull the trigger. So no official timeline. I wouldn't anticipate it going much. I don't anticipate going further than the summer based upon like everything that we've gathered, everything we've heard. That's just my pulse on the situation. Notre Dame, I think, is still in a good spot, but there's now, competition, obviously, against the Georgias of the world. Michigan was already in the conversation. He went out to USC a few weeks ago. So Notre Dame's going to have to battle for this one. And they're still, I would say, in the driver's seat, but there's people trying to catch up to him right behind him, obviously. So have to close on him because he's a very important player, 5-star defensive tackle out of Chicago.
Let's go to the next question here. We've got one up here from Tommy Guns. He says, how many coaches does Freeman make initial contact with? Is there a coach's board that would be similar to recruiting board with plan A and plan B guys? It's not quite like that, but it's similar, Tommy. There's some carryover. And how many coaches will be on it depends on how many he needs to have on it. And what that means is if I can assure you that Marcus Freeman has a short list of guys he's going to want to talk to if the time comes. If one of those guys is someone he knows that he has a relationship with and he already knows what they bring to the table, there's not necessarily need for a formal interview, then it could happen quickly and he won't have a very long list. If that initial guys are, kind of happy where they are, or it's just not a great fit, he has a guy that's on his short list, that's been on his short list. Because here's what happens when you're an assistant coach. You put together a list of coaches you've coached with or against that you'd love to have on your staff when you're a head coach. And so you may say, hey, look, I've always respected this. Here's an example. Boy, I love the job Alex Atkins is doing at Florida State. Boy, he did a really nice job with this offense this year. But then you look and say, but that doesn't make sense because I've got the best O-line coach in the business and I don't know what I'd have him coach. Okay, well, have him coach tight ends. Okay, then what do you do with Jared Parker, who you have a lot of respect for? You move him to receivers and move Chancey Stuckey to quarterbacks? Is that really the way to get your best 5 group of guys together? Maybe, maybe not. So you have to think about those things. So maybe that guy isn't someone that makes sense for you now, so you've got to expand your list a little bit. Maybe the guy you want as your offensive coordinator, someone who's a great receivers coach, but you really like the receivers coach you have and you don't have a quarterbacks coach. Or maybe it's a running back guy. So you have to look at those things and say, I've always wanted to work with this guy, but it just doesn't make sense right now because of the makeup of my staff I really like, and I need a guy that can coach quarterbacks or a guy that can coach tight ends or whatever the case may be. And then look at it that way. So that's part of it too. And that's going to determine how far down you go your list of coaches, because that's just how it works. And that's true for all coaches. All coaches may say, hey, I've always wanted to work with this guy, but the timing isn't right. Well, why isn't the timing not right? Because he coaches this position and I already have the best in the business at that position. So I would weaken myself at one position to get him as my coordinator. That doesn't make sense for me. So the timing's not right. Let's say that position's opens up. I've got a great quarterbacks coach. It opens up 2 years later. That guy is still out there. I now have an opening at quarterbacks coach and at coordinator. Hey, man, let's make this work because the timing is better. So that'll right there, honestly, Tommy, will be what determines how far down the list he has to go of the list he already has is, what are those guys' coaches. But I promise you, every assistant coach that has any aspirations of being a head coach has a list of people they know or they've gone against that they would hire. I did. I absolutely knew who when I was coaching, it was like, if I get a head coaching job, I know who my defensive coordinator is going to be. I already knew who it was, right? I knew who my running backs coach was going to be. And so that's just kind of how it was, Ryan. And I guarantee you Marcus Freeman has that kind of list. And that'll be the first place he goes to kind of look at, okay, who do I want to talk to?
Right.
And let's say he has a list of 6. 3 of those guys, just the fit's not right. Then he may say, okay, I got 3. I'll start reaching out to those guys, but we need to be doing some digging on some of these other guys. Plus, you have to allow for some new names to emerge, right? So 2-3 years ago, the offensive coordinator at Kansas is not someone we know about. But now you look at the job he's done with quarterbacks in that offense at Kansas, you're like, hey, this guy maybe wasn't on my radar before, and I like these 3 on my list, but I need to talk to that guy.
Right.
Whereas a couple years ago, that guy's not on your radar. I mean, 3 years ago, when Alabama's looking to hire Bill O'Brien to replace Steve Sarkisian, I can promise you Tommy Reese was not someone that Nick Saban was thinking about because the timing wasn't right. The fit wasn't right. He didn't have the experience. 2 years later, he's now on his list. So the list also has to evolve as well.
Right.
And that's going to make it a bigger list of guys you're going to work through. And you got to find the right fit.
And I like that you mentioned people that you coach against, because I feel like people miss that sometimes, right? They always think about, well, who has Marcus Freeman coached with in the past, right? Who has he been on previous staffs with? And it's an understandable thing because that does have some weight, right? I mean, Al Washington's here now, right? Jared Parker's here now. Like those are guys that Coach Freeman had coached with in the past. So that makes sense, those connections. But also on the other side of things, right? You have to remember Marcus Freeman was a defensive coordinator, right? So a lot of things in his mind would be like, if I need a new offensive coordinator, who are offensive coordinators in the past that I hated going against, that really gave me big challenges and made me have to think as a coach and then really kind of second guess myself, make adjustments. And I think that you have to also consider who has he seen and who has impressed him and who are those types of guys as well. So it's not just about your connections on previous staffs. It's also about the connections of who are guys that impressed you as competitors in that scenario.
You have to be careful because sometimes that can lead you hiring John Tenuta. I'm serious. Part of the reason Charlie Weiss hired John Tenuta is because John Tenuta tore his offense up in the opener of the 2006 season. But that's why you got to do a little bit more due diligence than that. That's what gets a guy's name on your list. But then you got to still do your due diligence with that guy a little bit more than you got to do a guy on your staff. Because you're absolutely right, Ryan. This guy's team is always ready. They're always coached well. They do this. They kick our butt every year. But then you start breaking their film down further, and you're like, yeah, but he can't stop this type of offense. And he only faced that twice a year at his school. He's going to face that 6 times a year here. May not be the same fit. So all of that kind of factors into it. But yes, I actually think sometimes it's who you went against can sometimes have an even greater impact on your desire to want to work with them than who you have worked with in the past. It can really have an impact. This guy ripped my defense up every single time we played him. I want to look into that.
I think it also takes bias out a little bit too, right? It's like I don't have any direct connection with this person personally, right? Like I don't know him. I can just make a very in-depth decision, very informed decision because I know what he does as a football coach. I don't know if I like him personally, but I know what he does as a football coach. And then also later down the line, if he's not doing a great job, you don't have as much connection as maybe another guy, right? Which makes those decisions even tougher. So I think that in a lot of areas, that actually is a big bonus, not knowing them personally, just keeping it on service to how good of a football coach is that guy, right? What does he do that really gives people difficulty? I think there's a lot of merit to that conversation. Oh, and we had a question from Brian. He says, I can't believe it. I made a live show.
Yeah,
What's up, fellas?
He's just fired up. Yeah,
Yes.
He's fired up. So wanted to get that up there as well. Here's a good one, Ryan. I'll ask this one of you from John A1. What are the similarities and differences between Donovan Heinisch and Kurt Heinisch?
Well, Donovan's a little longer than Kurt. Kurt was, he was about 6'2" with not the best length in the world. Donovan Donovan's a little longer. I think he's a little more athletic as well, a little more flexible. Look, Kurt was a pure nose tackle, right? Like he is going one direction and he is going to beat you up to do it, right? Tough guy. Donovan, I think, has some of those same similarities in the sense that he's a really tough football player, but I do think he has more upside than what Kurt Heinisch does because I think he's a little longer. I think he's a little more athletic, and I think he has a little more alignment versatility, right? Like, I'm sure that he could probably grow into a true nose down the line, but Kurt was just a nose. Like, you weren't going to move him out to 3-tech or 4-4-eye, do any of that stuff. You can do a little bit more with Donovan Heinisch just because he has a little bit more of a longer body and a little more athleticism, in my opinion.
The one thing you see in common with the two of them is motor. They both play with great motors. I mean, look, Kurt's bigger. That's really the advantage that he has on Donovan. Donovan's athleticism, like Ryan said, athleticism, quickness, agility, playmaking ability, all that's better than Donovan. From Donovan. And I think Kurt would probably tell you that. But Kurt was big and strong and had a tremendous motor and great heart. And that's not something that's necessarily in your DNA. That's sometimes just kind of who you are. As far as DNA, meaning like passed down, like, genetically, I got my height, my size, my whatever from my dad or whatever the case may be. But man, he is a guy that to me is got a lot of tools, right? It's just, I wish he had Kurt's size. That would be my thing. If you could put his athleticism and Kurt's size together, it's a really good football player because he's got a lot of tools to work with. There's no doubt. Let's get down here to a question from Brian Hockney. There we go, Brian. Thank you.
Brian's question, what are your thoughts on 2024 wide receiver Quasi Gilmer? Where would you project him to play on the next level? Well, I mean, so Quasi Gilmer, for people that don't know, he's a wide receiver out of California in the class of 2024. He was offered this past week by Coach Stuckey. So he's a really interesting player, Brian. He really is. He averaged about 20 yards a catch last year. He's got some length to him, but he really has long strides. So I don't think that he's necessarily the fastest athlete of all time. Like, I don't think that he's going to run like 4.4 something, right? Like, I don't think he's going to be a blazer, but he really eats up a lot of dirt with that long strides he has. And he's a vertically oriented player. And the one great thing, I think that we talked about this, Brian, I can't remember, but he's got great body control down the field as well. Can really contort his body and finish through contact, all that type of stuff. So we talked about Coach Stuckey not just going after the big dogs, but also finding a little bit of these gems. I think Quasi Gilmer definitely has some of those qualities to him. Where would he project? I mean, at wide receiver, I think that he's the guy to the field, right? All the way on the outside, because I think that he's got kind of some smoothness to him. He's got that long stride. I don't think he's necessarily a quick twitch athlete, so he's not going to be like a slot. And I don't know if he has the requisite speed to be like the W into the boundary in Notre Dame system. But I think to the field, he's got a good combination of, that long stride and that athleticism along with size that he could be a really nice weapon out there, in my opinion.
The thing about him, Ryan, is, let me ask you this. Do you view him as a boundary?
No, I want him to the fields. Yeah.
Why?
Because I don't think that I don't think he's incredibly fast. So I don't know if he'll consistently get on top of guys in man-to-man coverage into the boundary. I think that he's more he's kind of a long, slender built wide receiver that I don't want to be pressed a ton, right? Like I want him to have a little more space to work with, if that makes sense.
Okay, let's get to this next one here from Domerson's Birth. Gents, any comment on Brandon Davis Swain video from his visit to CU? I know you won't say anything bad about specific kids, but do you think there are some pursuing CU to put up their stock? So, Ryan, did you see the video? Look, when he decommitted, we knew Notre Dame wasn't going to recruit him anymore. So I really haven't paid attention to his recruitment. So, but to the second part, are there kids that are going to look at CU to up their stock and their visibility? Absolutely. In this world of NIL, you'd be silly not to go to a program that's not going to bring you a spotlight and a name brand. And especially when you go to a program that has a roster that's not very good, you're going to immediately walk in and be a name brand guy. You go to Notre Dame, you're just another guy. You go to Alabama, you got to prove yourself. You're a big name recruit that goes to Colorado. You are the guy that walks in with all the bragging rights or the persona or the marketability is probably the best word to use. So yeah, you're going to see some guys do that.
And I would say this too, Brian. I mean, that's what Colorado has going for them right now, right? They were not a good product last year. They're replenishing the roster. They have a brand, though, at the top with Deion Sanders, obviously, right? Like they have a proven brand, and they have the ability to, I think, get a little bit of that glitz and glamour from the Colorado name right now. There's nothing tangible about it. Like they're not a national title contender. They weren't even a very good football team in general last year, and they're a rebuilding program. But they do have some fanfare right now because they have primetime at top. And so, yeah, I don't doubt at all that. I mean, look, people hate the NIL stuff to a degree, the ways that it's used incorrectly. But if I'm a student athlete right now, I am improving my personal brand as much as I possibly can. I know people think it's silly, but like you make yourself work. You need yourself worth.
Here's the deal.
Yeah.
For players in college, they should absolutely be worried about their brand. Because look, what's the statistics? Like 6% of kids that play college football are going to go in the NFL. So that means a lot of these kids have a 4 to 5 year window to make as much money as possible off of their name, image, and likeness. Now, smart kids also understand that I got to put in the work because my brand no longer means a whole lot if I'm not good at this football thing, right? And so there's a desire to do that. But yeah, I mean, why not take advantage of that? That's how that's what NIL is supposed to be, right? Where, hey, look, you go out there and you're a great player and you're doing this, you're doing that. Like we saw something from Brock Bowers yesterday, where Brock Bowers said any money that he's being offered by the Georgia collectives, he says, I don't want, give it to the other players, right? Because his thing is he's going to go out and get it off of brands. He's going to get money off brands, which means I know I can market myself this way, and my real money is going to be made this way. So what I want you to do is go focus over here and give that money to these guys. And that's kind of the thing. And so you're going to see some of that too. But look, if you're a big name player, why not do that? Why not use your niche to do that? That's what NIL is supposed to be about.
Yes.
Now, I think there's other things too. Like, hey, if your institution is going to put you on a billboard, that's meant to attract people to the stadium, you should get something from that, right? You should get a cut of that. There's all those type of things that I think should go into those things that the school should be involved in. If you're going to sell jerseys in the school, then you know what? The players should get a cut of that. Whether you want to give it a cut of it to all the players or if you want to just give it to the player whose jersey is being sold, I think they should take a cut of jerseys. I think if it was up to me and I was the NCAA, I would do this. I'd pass a law that every institution that sells jerseys, they got to take a cut of that 10%, 15% of their jersey sales and put that in a fund that goes to the players at the end of every year. And you split it up between all the players. Those are absolutely things that they should be doing. But then, of course, to really make money, you've got to sell your own name. And so I have no problem with a kid saying, hey, I was down to 4 schools. I liked all of them, but this one gives me an opportunity to be in a market where I think I can really build myself up. I mean, if a kid really is that involved in NIL, sure, okay, I guess, whatever. But the reality is that's not what most kids are going to be making their decision off of that are big-time players because those guys still understand that my real money is going to come from the NFL. And you're seeing a lot of these kids like Jaden Rashada who were making the decision for the wrong reasons. They were going somewhere that was about money and money only, and you're screwing yourself to a degree because you need to go somewhere you can develop yourself. And that's what I think made Nico's decision so smart. Nico had offers on the table. He didn't go to Tennessee simply because they were the biggest financial offer. He went to Tennessee because he said, my skill set fits that really well, and this coach has proven that he can develop quarterbacks like me. Long-limbed, big-armed, kind of raw type of passers, and he can develop into what Hendon Hooker was. And so Nico put some thought into, yes, I want to get the maximum NIL deal, but I also need to make sure I'm going somewhere that's going to help develop me as a quarterback. Jaden Rashada didn't make a similar decision. Now, he ultimately ended up doing that, and I think he's now going to a place that may not give him the money he's going to make right now. He's not going to get $13 million from Arizona State, but he's going somewhere with Kenny Dillingham with a much better track record of producing big-time production at the quarterback position. That's much better for you than NIL, right? And this is a misnomer about Keon Keeley, right? Everybody thinks Keon went to Bama because they gave him the biggest financial deal. I can say with a 98% certainty that Keon left money on the table to go to Bama. Why? Because Keon's betting on Bama developing him into a top 10 NFL draft pick. That's where the real money is. And Keon gets that. And that's why he made that decision. And a lot of people think, oh, I just took the money. No, he didn't. He went somewhere that he thought was going to develop him for the next level. And that's what smart kids are doing. But it also doesn't mean you completely ignore the opportunity to go somewhere and market yourself. And I think that's what the smart kids are doing. That's really what it comes down to. All right, good question. Really good question so far. Let's get to some more here. We've got one from Ryan Schultz. He goes, just curious, does Saban reach out to Freeman before he talks to Reese out of courtesy, or is it just the Wild West? I don't know the particulars of this. My understanding is that Reese went to Freeman and let him know that there was interest there. I do not believe that Nick Saban reached out to him. And that's usually how it goes, unfortunately. I think there should be a level of respect in that if you're going to talk to a guy, you let that head coach know. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen often in college football.
I was about to say, I don't really remember too many stories of that ever happening. like that, I'm thinking about it. It's usually directly to the assistant, and then that's just kind of how that works, I guess, right? I mean, I'll say this: at least Tommy let Marcus know, because there's been some assistants that just don't tell anything, and then it's just, oh, I'm leaving, by the way. Lane Kiffin did that, for instance. There's been guys that have done that a lot. So
All right, let's get to this next question here from let's go up here from John A1. So he says, how would you evaluate Holden Stasis' 2022 play? What is his ceiling at Notre Dame?
I mean, I think it's positive that he got onto the field, right? I think
that was not something we expected at first.
Yeah. So, I mean, the fact that he got onto the field, because I know he obviously dealt with the injury prior, right? So it was nice to see. And that was even before Eli Raritan got injured. You saw some of Holden Stace, right? So, I mean, the production's obviously not going to knock your socks off. You only have one catch on the season. But I think the fact that Holden got some playing time, got his feet wet, I think that really does give you a nice little baseline to build off of this offseason into the spring and into the fall, because he's seen the field, right? Like, it's not a foreign thing to him. And now you're expecting, with Eli coming back from the injury again, and Kevin Bauman obviously banged up and all those good things, that along with Mitchell Evans, you're expecting Holden Stace to really grab some momentum this offseason. So I think that it was a big opportunity, John, in my opinion, for Holden to just see the field, because I think it's a good, it was a good chance for him to just see some live action, see how fast the game's going. And now you can start to really build off of this as offseason and hopefully grab a big role for this offense, which I think they need to find who that second tight end is behind Mitchell. And I think that Holden has as good a chance as anybody, obviously, with the health of certain guys.
Yeah. Let's get to another question here. We've got one from, we got Jordan's. Here we go. Here's one from Jordan Pinero. Do you think having potentially two new coordinators, if the golden rumors end up being true, would mess up continuity through enough to put our NC high run hopes in jeopardy next season? Well, let me just speak to that. I put this on the message board earlier. A lot of this Al Golden, the NFL stuff, is way premature. And somebody sent me a screenshot of what was reported on another site, and it was incredibly vague. And it's no different than what we've already said in the past, which is Al Golden interested in going back to the NFL? Yeah, he is. Are there NFL teams that'll have some interest in Al Golden? Yeah, there are. That's kind of a given. But right now, the post also said, but there's nothing going on right now. Then what the freaking heck are we putting it out there for? Other than just to get people to, talk about it or whatever, or click on it or whatever the case may be.
And to say you were the first to report it.
Right, I guess. But my whole thing is, it's fine to put it out there if that's what you want to do. I'm not blaming anybody, but like what we do is we deal in actual facts and reality. If there's a specific NFL team that reaches out and begins that process, then we'll talk about it. Until then, it's just I'm thinking about, yes, I have some interest, but it'd have to be the right place. And yes, they have some interest, but they may have 3 or 4 people that like more. And then what have we done? We spend a month talking about him going back to the NFL, and then he doesn't go. Right. So when there comes something to talk about it, we'll talk about it. Having said that, I do want to answer Jordan's question because it is a very fair question. I just needed to address that. And to you, Jordan, that comment wasn't to you. That wasn't to you. It's just in general, because I know this is being brought up a lot. But does it mess up continuity enough to put your national championship run hopes in jeopardy next season? I don't think so. Because number one, I don't think Marcus Freeman's going to bring in a coordinator that runs a completely different offense. Like, he's not going to go out and get an air raid coordinator, right? I mean, he's just not going to do that. He's going to find someone that comes from a similar philosophy of pro style offense. And then, you'll have all spring and all summer and all fall to teach those guys kind of what they're doing. And same thing with when you look at the defensive side of the ball. Look, you're going to bring in somebody that's going to kind of do some things you're going to do. And then it's up to the coach to adapt to sort of the terminology. And that's what happens with a lot of these instances, Ryan, is they'll kind of change their terminology, and the terminology, you know, like, or they'll change their schemes, but they'll keep adopt as much of the terminology as possible to try to help with it. Because if you're going to teach a new scheme, but you're teaching it with the same framework of, you know, sort of, okay, we're going to teach these new concepts, but we're using language and terms you already are comfortable with, then it'll be a lot easier for you guys to pick it up as opposed to having to learn new schemes and new language. It's actually easier to learn new schemes than it is to learn new terminology, in my opinion. Agreed. It's like, I mean, it's not literally. It's similar to where if you speak English and you try to learn Spanish. You know, it's the same words, but you've got to learn to communicate them in a completely different form, and you're not going to be as comfortable. And you may get a call and it doesn't quite register quite right away. Where if you keep the other part the same, then you're in a much better position. So I think they'll do a lot of that as well. But I can say that vaguely, Jordan. But then there could be the potential where there are hires that are going to try to do stuff that's so much different that it does create some continuity issues. So it's potential that it could create continuity problems. There's no doubt. It's just, it doesn't, in theory, it doesn't do that. It's more along the lines of who is the specific hire.
Sure.
And that would be the thing. Like if you get one of those coaches that's just dead set on, we're going to do it my way, and this is how we're going to do it, and I don't care what anybody else does, and you know, and then that's not going to work. But I don't think Marcus Freeman's going to be bringing in that kind of guy.
Sure.
So, and I also want to point out, too, that when Alabama won the title in 2017, that was the first year of Brian Dable, and it was the first year of Tosh Luopau being on the staff as co-coordinators. So there's instances where that's been something that's benefited them. And I also think I could be wrong on this. Let me look this up first, because I don't want to be wrong on this one. Yes, I would have been wrong on. Oh no, so here we go. So in 2015, the year that Clemson made their run to the title game, their coordinators, they had two new coordinators. Now they had kind of been on staff a little bit, but those were guys that run in the offense. They were going from what Chad Morris was doing to what they were doing, and there was certainly some similarities. So I mean, we've seen in the past where coaches have made changes, and those changes immediately went out and paid off, and sometimes it doesn't. It just depends specifically on who those guys would be.
I mean, and that's why it's an incomplete question, honestly. And Jordan, again, like if I knew, like if this did happen, this scenario where you're replacing both coordinators, I really need to know who the next guys are, right? Because at the end of the day, I mean, it's just speculation at that point. But if you have coordinator X that I know a little bit about, I can say like, I think he'll probably mesh pretty well. I think he'll be able to get in there, or there might be a little bit of a learning curve. So it's an imperfect answer, but it's one that we'll deal with if we have to deal with it at some point this offseason.
All right. Let's get to some more questions here. We've got one here, two-parters, well, kind of two segments from MT41. He says, I think the world of Tom Reese, but he's been inconsistent throughout his OC career. Do you think that he's not ready for the Alabama job yet? We've seen he can be elite, South Carolina, Oklahoma State, etc. But we've also seen way too many Stanford and Marshall game plans from him. Alabama won't put up with those game plans. Do you genuinely think he needs more time to develop? I mean, I can't say that in good faith, because I feel like we were kind of fired up to see what he could do at Notre Dame next year. I don't disagree with some of those inconsistencies. We could talk all day about why that happened and why did you have this game and that game and those kind of things, but those things happened, right? And so clearly Nick Saban sees enough of him to think that he's ready for the job. I mean, people say, well, other people have turned him down. It's not like he got turned down by 13 people and then like the last guy remaining is Tommy Reese, right? We only know of one guy that's turned him down, and that's Grubb. And yes. That's even, I'm not 100% sure of that. I'm confident saying that, Ryan, but I'm not 100% sure.
He was. I did reach out to someone yesterday. He was offered. I
don't think Lebby was offered the job.
I don't think so either. No.
So I think there's only been for sure one guy that's been reached out to and been offered the job, other than Tommy Reese. So it's not like Nick Saban had to go through his Rolodex for like 5 minutes to. Well, I guess we have to go with Tommy Reese. You know, I coached against him a couple of years ago. And, you know, Mario Cristobal wanted him. And, like, we have another question down here that I'm going to get to as part of this conversation, too, because I just want to get this all out now.
Yeah.
Some of you, and I'm not talking about you, MT, your questions are valid, but some of the others, y'all need to get out of your feelings a little bit and kind of get out of your own heads for a second. This is a question from John, who I'm just going to flat out say it. You're kind of a Reese hater at this point in time. You're not being rational. Point one, at what point do results matter? The results for Reese have been terrible. That's an incredible overstatement. Why do people see him as a great mind? Number two, perception is only reality in the military. Why do other coaches perceive Reese as a great offensive mind? I just want you to use some common sense for just 2 seconds, okay? Could it be that all these coaches that think that might know something a little bit more than you do when it comes to the perception of Tommy Reese? Maybe, just maybe, that all these coaches that think highly of Tommy Reese, that maybe you're in your feelings a little bit and you might be off because you're looking at it from an emotional standpoint. And I don't know what it is. Maybe you're pissed about the Stanford or Marshall game. Valid. Maybe you're one of those people that'll, I have a friend of mine who'll never root for Tommy Reese because he fumbled the ball against Michigan in 2011 when they were going in for the game, for the just back-breaking score against them. Okay, that's fine, but at least he admits that. At least my buddy admits that. Like, hey, look, it's irrational, and I don't, he might have called a good game against Clemson, but Notre Dame could go out there and score 60 points and have 700 yards of offense in the championship game, and he will celebrate that championship, but he'll still say, I'm still not giving Tom Reese any credit because he fumbled that ball against Michigan in 2011. At least he's honest about it. Some people aren't honest about it. They think that they have this like deep secret that Nick Saban and Marcus Freeman and Brian Kelly, these other people, me and you, that you're just way more savvy about this topic than we are, right? Two things can be true at once. Number one is Tommy Reese had some bad games this year. We have ripped him in this space at times this year. And then the other thing that can be true is also that he is a really smart football coach whose good scheme stuff outweighs, especially the last year and a half, far outweighs the Marshall and the Stanfords, right? Those games are not the norm of what Tommy Reese has done the last 2 years. You just can't argue that if you're being any sort of fair about this, right? The Marshall games and Stanford games count, no doubt. But there's going to be a lot of coaches that are going to look at that Stanford game, and it was not a great game plan, Ryan. You and I have said this plenty of times, but there was at least 5 or 6 just wide open receivers. Drew Pine just wouldn't throw the ball. Remember that game? He was so locked in on Michael Mayer, he just throw the ball anywhere else when other dudes are just running wide open. A coach is going to look at that. Someone who's not looking at this emotionally is going to look at that and say, okay, with my guys, that's not happening. That's their backup quarterback. With my guys, the ball's going where it needs to go. Now, that may not be true because maybe it was Tommy Reese who didn't properly coach him to get the ball where it needed to go to. That's also a fair point that people may say he was the quarterback's coach. But you also have to be open-minded enough to say, maybe he did teach him, and this happens, but when the lights get bright, this kid just doesn't respond the way that he does in practice. That's also true. And Ian Book was this way. I'd watch Ian Book in practice, and he would just complete like 90% of his passes. Ryan, it was insane. He just timing great and just great money balls. He's back shouldering people to death. And then he'd get to games, and it's like Captain Checkdown. You know what I mean? And it's just like, dude, I saw you make that throw 10 times on Tuesday. Well, why can't you do it on Saturday? Is that a coaching thing or is that a player thing? And, that's what coaches have to decide. But for people to think that his results have been terrible, that's incredibly misguided. Now, you can look at maybe his recruiting results have been inconsistent. That's very fair. Very fair. But people are going to look at a guy that was 30 years old this year, that put together some really good game plans, has coached in some huge games already. Tommy's 30. He's called games in the Rose Bowl with a national championship berth on the line. He's coached in the Fiesta Bowl. He's coached in the Gator Bowl. He's coached against Clemson 3 times in big moments already. He's coached against Alabama, as we mentioned. This is a guy that's coached in some big games. Nick Saban thinks that he's ready. Maybe he isn't. I'm not making a statement on that. I'm not saying that Tommy is ready to go thrive at Alabama. I don't know. He has a lot to prove this year. This is what we talked about in our show, Ryan, is I think Tom Reese has a chance to be a big-time coordinator. But he hasn't proven it yet. And part of the reason I didn't want him to leave was because I want him to prove that. I don't want Marcus Freeman and Brian Kelly and Notre Dame and all the people that have kind of helped build Tom Reese up to not get a benefit from all that investment, and then he gets and shows it all in Alabama.
Sure.
kind of bothers me a little bit, if I'm going to be honest with you. But if you can't see why people think highly of him, I don't really know what to tell you, except that maybe you're not looking at this rationally. That's the only thing I can say. But you can still see what other people see, Ryan, but still say, yeah, I don't know if he's going to do well there because of this, this, and this. I think that's a fair thing to say as well. But stuff like this is not a rational thing, line of criticism, in my opinion. It's just not.
I feel
MT's
like
MT41s was much more, to me, much more rational and I think conversational and debatable. I think it's a much more debatable point, in my opinion, Ryan.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is because MT just was saying that he's inconsistent, which I would say the same thing. Tommy Reese is inconsistent. I see some really good stuff, and then there's a couple floundering games that really matter, like frustrate you. I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, I would keep it as simple as this, man. Like, I feel like I say this all the time, almost on every show now, but it's okay to have middle ground. It's okay, right? Because I have been hard on Tommy after several games, but I've never once said that Tommy Reese is not a smart offensive coordinator. Like, I don't think that. I think Tommy's very sharp.
Or that he's terrible, right?
Or that he's terrible. No, Tommy Reese is a good OC. He's a smart dude. Do I think that there's a level that he needs to get to? Absolutely. There's no doubt. There's no doubt. You can't have some of the clunkers that he has occasionally, right? You can't be inconsistent. There's no doubt about that. But it doesn't make a person terrible, or it doesn't make them great.
The result's terrible, right?
Exactly. He has some great flashes. He's a good OC that needs to get to a higher level still, right? But that doesn't mean that he's terrible, he's awful, he doesn't deserve to call a football game. Like, that's ridiculous. And
or
to your point,
make you like, why in the world I mean, y'all, Nick Saban is the greatest coach of our generation. He's not infallible. He makes mistakes.
Yes.
This may prove to be a mistake.
But
if you don't think there's something,
He hired Pete Golding, right?
Bingo. So. Right, bingo. But if you don't think that there's not something to see there, then that's a you problem, not a Nick Saban problem. And that's my only point with this. And look, Tommy Reese could not have come back to Notre Dame next year and been exactly what he was in 2022. It's not good enough. Absolutely. And you can say, well, he's got a quarterback now. Yeah, not enough blame with some people is put on Drew Pine. But with other people, too much blame is put on Drew Pine.
Yes.
That's the thing is, like, so you can say with a better quarterback, they would have been better, but you also can say, but I don't think he always did enough to get the most out of Drew Pine as well. 100%. And that's what we say is, like, you got to find that rational. I'm not one of those people like, you got to find the middle ground. And sometimes the middle ground is inaccurate, and it is here or here.
Sometimes he's terrible.
Right?
Sometimes Brian Van Gorder was terrible. Like, there's no middle ground there. He was terrible.
And he was, because he was terrible more often than not.
Yes.
Tommy Reese has had some bad games. You know who else has had some bad games? Every other coordinator in America, right? That's coached more than a season. And even some of those guys. I mean, Joe Brady had a couple games, Ryan, that I went back and looked, and because I study LSU's 2019 season a lot. And there were games in 2019 where he didn't call a good game. Or, that staff didn't call a good game, didn't have a great game plan. But you know what worked? It worked because they had way better players than everybody else, right? They didn't call a good game against Mississippi State that year. Mississippi State gave him a battle for a while. He didn't call a good game there. But you know why they still won? Because they had way better players. Yep. And it didn't matter at that point in time. Tom Reese doesn't have that. So when he does have not a great game plan, it's going to be a lot more noticeable because he has a quarterback that can bail him out. That's the reality of it. And so they tend to look worse and worse and worse. And you say, okay, well, he's responsible for recruiting quarterbacks. To a degree, you'd be correct. And that's fair to say. But you also then can't say, well, he's been a terrible, recruiter of quarterbacks. Well, that's also very incorrect because Tyler Buckner's a big-time quarterback talent, and he's got two guys coming in that are also very talented. It's been inconsistent, and that's been an issue.
Well, Brian, I feel like the fan base also did this with Brian Kelly when he left, right? It's like, did I like Brian Kelly? No, I did not like Brian Kelly. Was Brian Kelly a bad coach, though? No, Brian Kelly wasn't a bad coach. He was a good coach. Maybe he's a slightly overrated, right? Like, maybe, but, like, he's not a bad coach. That's just being in your feelings at that point, right? I mean, I could sit here and say, did not like Brian Kelly. I do think it was time to move on, but he was still a good coach. All those things could be the same.
The job he did is not a job that everyone could have done. Otherwise, the three previous coaches who couldn't do it would have done it.
100%.
And so, yes, that's the thing I think that happens a lot is we get to these, you pick a side. It's like we've talked about the running back conversation. It's like there's fans in this chat and more so on Twitter. It's not as much in our chat. There's a lot of fans on Twitter who are, team Logan Diggs or team Audric Estime. And if the other guy gets touches, it's like they think the coaches are screwing up. Like, why isn't this – why are you giving the ball to Logan Diggs? Why? So you're thinking that Audric Estime should literally be the only person that carries the football, and there's no value to giving Logan Diggs football? And then it's the same way with the people that are Team Logan. It's like, why can't we as Notre Dame fans like say, hey, look, how about you be team all of them? It's like some people – I like Logan Diggs, so every time they put Chris Tyree in the game and he doesn't make a carry, it's because he sucks. Well, maybe it's the coaches aren't using him correctly. Right. And that's just some of that stuff just kind of frustrates me a little bit, Ryan, because we don't have enough nuance. I think that's what it is. I wouldn't say middle ground because that makes me think like we should all be like moderates and stuff, and I just can't stand that. Yeah. I think it's more about just finding. I think it's just about being, a little bit more rational with it, like just. Finding some nuance, I think, is the way to look at it. It doesn't have to be black and we're very much in a polarized black or white society. You either hate the president or you don't. You either hate this team or you don't. You either hate this food or you don't. If this person says something you don't like, cancel them. It's like sometimes it's like, hey, that person said something stupid, so I don't really care to listen to you anymore. But I'm not going to then go try to get you fired from your job, right? I mean, it's like, there's people we've kicked off out of our chat for saying things that are cross the line, or we've kicked off of our message board because there's rights and wrongs, but I'm not then trying to get that person fired from their job. I'm not trying to get them canceled for life. And it's just this thing where if you don't believe what I believe, you're a bad person.
Or slander them constantly.
Yeah. It's just like, look, Tom Reese has done some really good things in Notre Dame. He didn't do a good enough job yet, though, but potentially he was on the verge of it. So this is either going to be and this is a risky hire for Nick Saban if he makes it. It's a risky hire. You're betting that Tommy's going to take that next step with your resources. That's what you're betting on. Maybe he does, and maybe he doesn't. And so we'll find out if this is going to be a good hire or not. I'm not saying if it's a good hire, it's not a good hire. What I am saying is, but I can understand why Nick Saban would be looking at Tommy Reese because he's a pro-style guy who likes the complex pass game. That's a lot of what Tommy Reese does, sometimes to a fault, in my opinion, to be completely honest with you. But that's what Nick Saban's looking for. And we'll see if it pays off or not. But some of this stuff just goes way too far. Yes. This goes way too far. Jordan Pinero says, what would the realistic timeline be for choosing a new OC? Honestly, Jordan, there isn't one. And I talked with somebody yesterday, and basically what was said is, look, right now, we're just kind of sitting back and waiting for Coach Reese to make his decision. We've got some people that we would look at if the time comes, but we're just going to sit back and let for him to make his decision. But the reality is that it's much more important to make the right hire than it is to make an expedient hire. Obviously, there's a hope that there can be a both, but that depends on, is your first batch of guys you want to go get, are they interested in the job? Is it a fit? And so I think it's a little bit of both. So they'll work with some patience on this, but also with some. I mean, there's a sense of urgency, right? Because spring practice starts in a month, but it's not like they've got to get a guy hired by Friday. And if the right guy's there, that could happen quickly. But anyone that knows Notre Dame's HR process knows that hires at Notre Dame don't happen quickly unless the guy's been a coach at Notre Dame before. So we'll see how it plays out. All right, let's get to some more here. Here's one from John A1. I rewatched the North Carolina game, and Chris Tyree had a big impact on the game. Will the 2023 offense, if Reese stays, be more the UNC 3-back attack or South Carolina 2-back attack with a sprinkle of Tyree? Honestly, John, even if Reese leaves, that needs to be part of what they do. And I think some games is going to be dependent upon, it could be one or the other. Some games you're just going to, look, the reality is if I was the main advisor to the new OC or to Tommy Reese, and he did exactly what I wanted him to do, there's going to be games where Chris Tyree's just a sprinkle. because of just the way the game is going. Like, dude, we're dominant here. We don't need that right now. They can't stop this right here. So why are we going to, so he may only get 3 or 4 touches just to kind of keep teams honest, but man, we are just running it down their throat. And
can I give you an example?
Yeah, go for it.
So the Syracuse game, right, where Notre Dame just came out, they were going against an undersized front, and Notre Dame was just bullying them right up the middle. Like, that's probably not a game that Chris Tyree needs to be crazy involved.
He doesn't need 10 touches in that game necessarily.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, should they still use him a little differently just to keep that team honest? Sure. Yeah, there should be some of that. And then there's going to be some games where he's a 10-plus carry guy and has a big impact on the game, like Cal, like North Carolina. But even if all you use him is sort of one of those games where he just is kind of a sprinkle like he was against South Carolina, then great. Because let's not forget the first 10-plus yard run of that game, I believe, was from Chris Tyree. He just cut back an inside zone. You remember that, Ryan?
Yeah.
And then, of course, he had the big 3rd down conversion on the game-winning touchdown drive. He didn't have a lot of touches. It was a Logan Diggs, Audric Estime game for the most part, but Chris had some clutch plays. He just didn't have the same volume. Both of those games, to me, were great usage of a 3-down offense. Not every game is going to be Logan gets this many, Audric gets this many, and Chris gets this many, and it's going to be that way every game. There's going to be some games where, dude, Logan is hot today. Let's keep riding him. Let's keep, or Audric is on fire today. You know what? They have no answers for Chris Tyree in space. None. And so we're just keep feeding them until they stop it. Right. And that's partly why you need to use a 3-back offense when you have this kind of talent in the backfield, because they're all so different, Ryan, that if some teams are going to choose to take away. I'll give you an example from my coaching career. I think I've used this before. My year at Duquesne, we had 3 really good receivers. Our 2 outside guys were dynamic. Our inside guy was just like a clutch, chain mover, really money guy. And a lot of teams would try to stop Michael Warfield as our boundary guy, but we played a team, and I can't remember if it was Siena or St. Peter's, but they came out with a game plan where Yarden Brantley was our fast guy. He ran a 4.42 for the Eagle Scouts, which is why they signed him to their mini camp. But he was our burner, and they were afraid of Yarden. And so wherever Yarden lined up, they would put a corner and a safety over top of him. We figured this out pretty quickly. And so we started using Yarden to move to places where we wanted to manipulate the defense so we could throw to somebody else. So we wanted to bang a backside post. We'd put Yarden, in the slot and have him run a corner, or put him on the outside and run a go, depending on what they were doing coverage-wise. And so he had 2 catches for 6 yards. But I think Randy had like 10 catches in that game, and Michael Warfield went off in that game and had a bunch of yards, and we ripped that team apart, right? Because some team is going to say, we're just not going to let Audric beat us today. Well, okay, that's cool, but then we're going to kill you with Logan Diggs and Chris Tyree. And that's going to happen, and that's just the way the game is going to go. There's going to be some games where just like you can't stop Audric today. Like if Notre Dame would have had another drive against South Carolina, I'm feeding 7 because they were worn out and they could not stop 7. Right. And then there's other games where it's like this team has no team speed in the box. We're going to make them chase Chris Tyree for the entire first half, maybe 3 quarters. And then there's going to be gas. And then we're going to come and just destroy him with Audric in the 4th quarter. But that's what's great about having those 3 guys is no matter what they're doing, we have a back that we can respond with.
Right.
And that's why they all need to be all 3 need to be a part of the game plan, in my opinion.
No doubt.
Great question, John. All right. Let's get down to hear some more. We've got one from. Let's get down. I want to get from someone we haven't had yet so far. Let's get down here. Adam Blair, here we go. Ryan, I'm a Saints fan. Since we have the 29th pick, what do you think? Are you trying to rub it in my face, Ryan? That's hurtful.
No,
Adam. I mean.
Oh, Adam. I'm about to say.
Because who had the 29th pick up until a couple days ago? I'm just messing with Adam here a little bit. The Broncos did for those. Not sure of what I'm talking about here. But he says, Ryan, I'm a Saints fan. Since we have the 29th pick, what do you think we should do with our team this offseason? And obviously with the first-round pick being part of that conversation.
Sure. I mean, the Saints are in a tough spot, in my opinion, man. They look, Brian, do you know who the Saints' top quarterback was this year?
Wasn't it the guy from TCU?
Andy Dalton. That's right, man.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they do not have their future at quarterback right now. Obviously, you're most likely not going to get a guy with the 29th overall pick, right? You're not most likely not going to get that guy. But, I mean, honestly, Adam,
can I ask a question?
Yeah.
What would you think? I'm only bringing this up, right, because I want, before you move away from quarterback,
yes.
What would you think of the Saints drafting Tanner McKee, 29th?
Oh, no.
Do you
I'm
think
just
he has
not,
first round talent?
no. I mean, I'm kind of out on Tanner McKee a little
I only
bit.
ask because I've seen some people talk about how maybe he could slide into the back of the first round.
I really don't see that. I personally don't. I mean, would I be against it maybe
What
in
would be
the
the reasons? I'm not arguing. I'm just
yeah.
asking.
I just think that the lack of mobility scares me a lot, man. Like that lack of mobility, and then he's been banged up a little bit during his career. Like all those things together just kind of scares me a little bit. I don't know, just really does. I think that if he was just a little more out of structure stuff that he could do, just a little bit more. But I just think that the fact that he just isn't incredibly mobile just scares me half to death, to be honest. Like, it just does. And I think he's also a little bit developmental, and he's not the youngest quarterback either to be in a developmental stage.
Right,
and
because he did a 2-year mission. Right.
Exactly. So I personally wouldn't be in that conversation, but I mean, it's going to be a tough scenario though, Adam. Like, I don't know what the answer is at quarterback. I mean, that's the main takeaway for the Saints, because their roster is in a really strange spot right now. You backloaded so many contracts for so many years under Sean Payton with Drew Brees because you were constantly making a run, and for good reason, right? Like, you took your shot. Like, I 100% get it. But now you're looking at the team and you're like, all right, offensive line is still solid. I mean, you need the first round pick from last year at Northern Iowa to come back and hopefully be a dude. I know he missed all the year with the injury, but you still have Ryan Ramczyk, who I know is a really good football player. You got Eric McCoy, who's a solid football player. Like, there's some pieces on the offensive line. Wide receiver, I mean, Chris Olave had a nice rookie year, but you still need to find other weapons outside of Chris Olave. I mean, they were using the Shaheed kid, who was an undrafted free agent out of Weber State, as one of their main weapons down the stretch of the season. And like, that's awesome that he found a role, but like, I don't think that he should just be that main player. So I think offensive skill position just in general needs a reboot. It really does. Defensively, the Saints are still in a pretty good spot. I mean, you have Dennis Allen as your head coach, who is a good defensive mind. Is he a great head coach? I don't know. I mean, he hasn't impressed me overly in the 2 jobs that he's had so far, but we'll see what happens. Regardless, though, he's a smart defensive coach. He's still got Marcus Lattimore on the back end, who I know was banged up for most of the year, but he's still a really talented football player. Pete Werner in the middle with Demario Davis are still obviously a very good middle. You have Cameron Jordan up front. So I think defense, you're in a pretty solid spot. It's just offensively, you need to figure out the skill position, man. You're just not nearly as explosive enough as you need to be. You don't have your quarterback. So what would you do with that 29th pick? I honestly don't know. I mean, is there a wide receiver on the board there that you like? I mean, I guess we can have that conversation, right? Is there a Joshua Downs at 29 that you really like? Is there a Jordan Addison maybe even that you like at that spot? Like, is there a wide receiver that you're setting yourself up for the next franchise quarterback for the Saints? That could be a conversation piece, but I mean, obviously the quarterback is the spot that you would like to fix, but I just don't know if you have the assets capable to figure that out this offseason. This might be hey man, we need to rebuild some of this offensive structure. Let's start getting this roster turning in the better direction. Let's start rebooting, get a little younger in certain spots, and then find your quarterback in 2024. That might be the spot you're in right now. So I think initial conversation after talking this out a little bit is 29th overall, offensive weapon, get a wide receiver in there to pair with Chris Olave. So at least you're setting yourself up for whoever the quarterback is long-term. You have some guys around him to be successful.
Let me ask you this question, Ryan. Do you think teams in the market for a quarterback that don't have the capital to move up probably this year or next, could you see some situations where the market after the draft for guys already on teams like Davis, like if the Texans draft a quarterback, does Davis Mills become a commodity for a team? I mean, did he show enough I know he struggled this year. Did he show enough as a rookie? I mean, what happens? Like, does Derek Carr become a much more hot commodity for some of these teams? Like, if you're a team like the Saints, for example, what is it? Because I guess part of it depends on what the Raiders are looking for. And knowing the Raiders, they'll ask for too much and then not get anything and just keep them on their roster and have to pay them a lot of money to be a backup quarterback. Knowing the Raiders. But the point is, I mean, there are going to be some guys out there that teams can say, hey, look, let's take a flyer on this guy, build up these other positions in the draft. And if we don't, and if it doesn't work, then we're going to be picking in the top 10 next year. We go get a quarterback next year.
No, I think that I mean, that's the best case scenario, in my opinion, because if you're the Saints, again, this was an old roster, right? It was an old roster at the end of the Drew Brees era. So you're trying to rebuild and get younger in a lot of places. So it really depends for me, Brian, personally. Is there a player out there, a Davis Mills that you're talking about, even a Gardner Minshew, someone like that, that could at least be a stopgap option that's for cheap, right? Like if I tossed you a 4th-round pick for Davis Mills, for instance, would that be enough? Would you get him off the roster since you have Bryce Young? I mean, if that situation happens, maybe I kick the tires and see if he's the guy. If not, I mean, he was a former 3rd-round pick that you gave up a 4th-round pick for. So it's not like you invested a ton of assets into a Davis Mills. I just really think the risk has to be a low risk type of opportunity for me. Like, I'm not giving up a 2nd-round pick for Derek Carr, for instance, because he's also has a bigger contract, right? Like, if there's a kid out there, if you can get a 4th or a 5th rounder for Gardner Minshew, even, can Gardner maybe get something going? If he doesn't, at least you didn't give up a ton of assets for him, personally.
All right, good stuff, Ryan. Good stuff. Let's get to some more here. We did have some super chats. I want to get to one from Tyler Evans. He says, Mr. Roberts, which NFL team will mortgage their future to move up to the draft for a quarterback? And my additional add-on to that, will there be more than one?
There may be more than one. That's a very interesting, because I think the Raiders are a team that makes some sense, obviously, with the Derek Carr conversation that's happening. I think the team that everyone keeps talking about most, and I think it's very realistic why this one is that if you're the Carolina Panthers and you're at pick 9, you are in a strange place there at number 9, right? Because as it looks like right now, the Houston Texans are picking at 2. They're going to take a quarterback, right? They're going to take one. You have the Indianapolis Colts at number 4. They need a quarterback. There's no doubt about it. The Panthers are in that weird spot, though, Brian, where it's like, if you don't get one of the top 2 to 3 quarterbacks, you might be staring at yourself in the face and being like, what am I going to do now? Like, I'm not going to roll with Sam Darnold again next year. Like, I'm not going to do that. So I think Carolina's a team that makes sense to move up. I think Indianapolis at number 4 would make sense to trade with the Bears if there's a guy that they absolutely love that they want to make sure that they can get with the number 1 overall pick. So to your question, which I think is a good add-on, I could see the Colts moving up to make sure they got their guy at number 1, and I could see the Carolina Panthers being a team that moves up to make sure that they get one of the top 2 quarterbacks. And I could see the LA Raiders being involved in the quarterback market as well. So I think there's multiple teams that could be in that market. Absolutely.
Here's the next part of this question, Ryan, is what the secondary quarterback market? And for me, that involves the Tanner McKee. It involves the Anthony Richardsons. If Anthony falls down, because there's going to be a lot of teams that are going to wisely say there's no way I'm trading capital to move up to get Anthony Richardson in the top 10. Because I've seen people talking about him being a top 10 pick, which I think is nuts. But how far down does he have to fall before teams start saying, okay, now he's in a range I'm comfortable moving up for? And then also you start getting, because after you get past that, it's like the quarterback talent in the draft becomes a little bit shaky.
Yes.
And so does there become a run late first round, early into the second round for Tanner McKee? Now, not what you think, because you and I both know there's been quarterbacks picked high that you and I are like, there's no way I'm touching that guy on day 2, much less day 1.
Sure.
My question is more of looking at what NFL teams might do in a league that is terrible at evaluating quarterbacks and also gets real panicky when it comes to quarterbacks, right?
Right.
Could you see a secondary quarterback run happening at the end of the middle to end of first round for some of those, the non-Levis, the non-Bryce Young and CJ Stroud group of quarterbacks?
I mean, it usually happens. Last year was the admiration, right? Like that is the exception to the rule. The quarterback last year, teams were just like, nope, don't like any of these guys. So one quarterback went in the first round, and then you didn't see another quarterback go until the late second round, I think is where the next one was taken. I think Desmond Ridder went with one of the last couple picks in the second round. So it was a weird year in that sense. But I do think that Anthony Richardson's a guy that if he starts getting into the mid to late 20s, a team that's maybe in a decent quarterback situation as far as having maybe an older veteran that's still a good player, but maybe on the decline or going to retire in the near future, I think that he would make a lot of sense to be a guy that redshirts as a rookie, right? Where you can kind of get him up to speed. I think that could be a guy Tanner McKee, you mentioned. Some people like Jaron Hall. I'm missing it with Jaron Hall right now as a pro prospect. I liked him as a college football player, but I'm missing a little bit. I would say this, Brian.
Yeah,
if there's
very good college quarterback, not an NFL backup. That's what he is.
Not a first round, not a late first round player, but I think a value that would happen in the second or third round, even depending on the injury, is Hendon Hooker. I think is a guy that is going to be now he could have been a guy that may have went late first round if he was not injured. He went through the entire process, went to the Senior Bowl, did all that type of stuff. I think Hendon Hooker is a guy that people could potentially get a nice value on. Maybe it's somewhere in the second round where you say, hey, if I have to move up a couple spots to secure Hendon Hooker, because he's probably not going to play at all as a rookie, right? He's probably going to miss the majority of the season, but he could be another redshirt candidate along in a similar vein with Anthony Richardson for obvious different reasons. But after that, man, it's like, I like Jake Haener as a backup type long term, but like, is somebody going to jump up to get a guy like a Jake Haener? Like, I like him, but like, he's not a starting quarterback more than likely in the NFL. So the well dries up very quickly with guys like Phil Dracovic and them going back to school with obviously the situations that they're working through. So I think that the late first round conversation is probably one guy, and then there might be one or two guys on day two where you're like, okay, we'll take a gamble on that type of dude.
Next year's QB draft class is going to be very fascinating because it could be a thing where it's just a couple dudes at the top, or it could be a deal where you're like, I'm not trading up into the top 5 because there's 6 first-round quarterbacks in this draft class. It could be one of those two extremes because there's so many of those guys like Phil Dracovic is getting first-round talk. You cannot possibly talk to me about Phil Dracovic being a first-round quarterback after the last 2 years and all the injuries and some of the things that have gone on with him. But he was really good under Cignetti. Does that change now he's back with Cignetti? I have no idea. And if he does play well, is that enough for you as an NFL guy to overcome what he did the last year and a half since he's been hurt? There's just so many of those unique scenarios, Ryan.
Quinn Ewers take a big jump, like
Sam Hartman. What does he do if he comes out and he just looks like, okay, all the questions we had about him, size, durability, arm strength. Well, he just went out and did it at Notre Dame against Ohio State and USC and Clemson and Georgia and whoever else. It's going to be fascinating. If
Kyle McCord gets a starting job at Ohio State and he just balls out, although I know we're both against taking one-year wonders, but like still.
But my point is what I mean by that is, Ryan, is I'm not taking a one-year wonder with the number 2 overall pick like the Bears 100%. Did. 100%. But you start getting to those, if a class is so deep, there's going to be somebody in the 20s that I'm willing to take a flyer on a one-year wonder at 23. You know what I mean? And okay, I'm not going to trade enough capital to get up into the top 10 because I think I can hang around in the late first, early second and get a Sam Hartman in round 2 and take a flyer on him. And then if it doesn't work, there's just going to be those interesting things next year, depending on how guys develop. Because like you said, there's a lot of they could be here and they could be here guys in next year's draft class at quarterback, which is going to make it really interesting. And even Drake May. Okay, Drake May was great this year. I want to see what he does next year in a new offense, with losing some of the guys he had around him. Can he elevate the people around him or not? Because I'll say this, when the players around him didn't play well, Drake May struggled, right? Which is expected from a first-year quarterback.
No doubt.
But now that you're in year 2, I want to see you – because Caleb Williams had a little bit of that his first year, where he couldn't really elevate what was around him. Well, he was a first-year starter. Well, then in year 2, Caleb Williams is able to elevate everybody around him. Right. Same with, so now we get to see if Drake May do a similar thing. We'll find out. But all of it's fascinating. It's going to be for draft people, the quarterback class of 24 is going to be fascinating.
Because then there's a bunch of young guys too, man. Like Riley Leonard's going to be a third-year sophomore. It's like, that's a kid that's interesting, Like there's some guys that are just out there that you're just like, not many people talk about that dude, but I mean, Riley Leonard's got some tools now, man. Like, can he be that guy? I don't know, but it's going to be an interesting conversation piece. You're absolutely right.
Right. And it could have got really interesting if Brock Purdy doesn't get hurt and the Niners win. I'm not saying they lost because of Brock Purdy getting hurt. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying,
certainly didn't help.
Right. But then you say, okay, now do teams start saying, well, dude, if these guys can get to the Super Bowl with this guy, you know what I mean? Like, then two teams, because as you said, this is a copycat league. It's like the Niners have gotten to the Super Bowl 3 times with Jimmy Garoppolo, Colin Kaepernick, and now Brock Purdy. Mm-hmm. None of those guys are first-round picks. So again, it all is just so fascinating to see how it all plays out. Like Jalen Hurts getting to the Super Bowl. Like, hey, you know what? Maybe we don't need to go for these top 10 guys and give all this draft capital. The Eagles didn't. They stayed pat. They got a guy. What round did he go? Second, third?
Second round. Yep.
Hey, stand pat, get a guy like him, and then make sure that the talent around him is really good, because that's really where you're at. Do you take a Pat Mahomes and give up draft capital to get him? And this is hypothetical because I know the Chiefs have been able to draft well in some of the later rounds, but do you give up that draft capital and to get the star, and then he's got to kind of lift everybody else up because there's not enough players around him,
right?
Or do you say, let me wait till round 2, get this really good player, and then use my higher premium draft picks in round 1 and some of my free agent money to then say I'm gonna elevate the talent around him, because those are the two strategies. And you're seeing the Super Bowl is an example of both strategies working. Right? Because if you take Pat Mahomes off the Chiefs and add anyone not named Joe Burrow or Josh Allen, they're not a Super Bowl team. They're just not. From what I've seen in the playoffs, they're just not. Maybe they've been better in the regular season, Ryan, but you take Pat Mahomes off there and put anyone other than those two guys on that roster, they're not a Super Bowl team.
Okay.
There are there's a lot of – this is no disrespect to Jalen Hurts, who did a great job for them in the games I watched in the playoffs and statistically, but – with all due respect, there's several quarterbacks that could do what Jalen Hurts is doing because the talent around him is really good on both sides of the ball.
And you're in a situation with Jalen Hurts right now where he's a second-round quarterback on a rookie deal, right? Bingo. Like you can allocate capital and contracts in a lot of different areas. I mean, if you look at that roster right now, I mean, it's like you had to pay A.J. Brown, you had to play Javon Hargrave, you had to pay – James Bradbury on the other side of Darius Slay, and that all. I mean, that offense is the roster. And shout out to Howie Roseman for this. The roster has like no holes in it, man. The Eagles roster is so good. But this offseason, Jalen Hurts is probably going to get paid, right? He's probably going to get $30+ million a year. So you took your shot with a rookie quarterback or a quarterback on a rookie deal. I think the nuanced conversation too, Brian, to your point is that both can work in that first rookie window. But now if you're paying Jalen Hurts, can that be sustainable now if he has to now elevate people around it? Because the talent is not going to be as good moving forward as it was this year.
What's he making? $1 million?
So, not much.
What's your roster look like when you got to pay him 30?
Exactly. And you can't afford James Bradbury. Minimum. You can't afford. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah, that's what makes this all really fascinating. Really, really fascinating. Okay, so that's Tyler Evans. Now we have one from Tyler Smith. What teams do you think – thank you for the super chat, Tyler. What teams do you think have won the offseason?
As far as college football?
This is college football, yeah.
Okay. Teams have won the offseason. So, I mean, I'm thinking about what they've hired as coordinators, right? I'll say it like this.
Coordinators, recruiting, transfer portal. Yeah.
I'll say this. I think Florida State had a great offseason for the players that they retained that were already on their roster. They dipped into the transfer portal. They got guys like Braden Fisk, who's a really talented player. They got the cornerback from Virginia, the
a tad overrated by some, but still a good football player.
Still a good football player. Better than what they have right now at cornerback. So they got some decent transfer portal players, but the two biggest acquisitions they had this offseason were already on their roster. They got back their quarterback, and they also got back Jared Verse at defensive ends. You got back your two best players, and most impactful players at least.
Yeah, I think they've had a really good offseason, and they didn't lose any of their key coaches. They didn't lose any of their – like nobody's taken Alex Atkins yet. Excuse me. But they also got – I mean, they got a transfer offensive lineman from Auburn as well. They needed help at guard because Dylan Gibbons is gone, and so they were able to get his – potentially get his replacement. They got Jaheim Bell from South Carolina. Yes. So they've had a very good offseason.
They got Jeremiah Byers from Utah.
That's right,
too,
from
right?
Utah.
He's a baller, man. He's a really good player.
Florida State's had a really good offseason. I think Ole Miss went out and got a lot of portal guys on defense, which they needed. That's kind of been an issue for them. This last year, especially on defense, was really bad for them. I'm just trying to think of some teams kind of off the top of my head that I don't know how well it's going to work. I think Oklahoma got some quality defensive players to come there. I think USC's had a good offseason. I think that everybody's going to talk about the receiver from Arizona. I'm never concerned about who. Notre Dame didn't lose to USC this year because they had great receivers. They lost to USC because Notre Dame couldn't stop the run and Caleb Williams did some Superman stuff, right?
Yes.
And Notre Dame's quarterback turned the ball over in huge moments. But the pickups that they like, they got 2 guards and a tackle. They're really good football. 2 kids from Florida, and then the third kid from Washington State. No, 2 guards and a tackle, yes, that are good football players. They're good, big physical guys. So I thought it was some of those pickups that I thought helped them. They got the kid from Purdue, who is not a great player, but it's a good pickup for them. It helps them replace the DN that they, not the kid that got all the sacks, but the other DN they had.
The Sullivan kid?
Yeah, Sullivan's not going to replace the Thule kid. He's going to replace the other one, and I can't remember that guy's name. He was also a transfer a few years ago, and I'm drawing a blank on his name. This is going to bother me. Just give me a second, Ryan. This is going to tick me off as soon as
it's not Figueroa, is it?
Yes,
right?
yes,
Figueroa?
yes,
Okay.
yes. And to me, he's a slight upgrade over Figueroa. He's not a great player, but he's a slight upgrade over Figueroa to me. And so they've had some solid pickups this offseason. So I think those are teams just off the top of my head that have had good off seasons. If I thought of some more, I'm sure look, I think Wisconsin's had a good off season in regard to getting pieces to fit what they're trying to do. The question now becomes, Ryan, is what they're trying to do going to be successful? Right? That's a legitimate debate. However, if you're going to make that move, you needed to make some of the moves that they have made and had some success with. Was it a great offseason? No, and I have serious doubts about whether or not that's going to work. But within that standpoint, I think that, okay, if you're going to make that move, you're making steps to give yourself the personnel to make it work with the transfer portal, in my opinion. I just don't think it's going to work at Wisconsin.
You know how people always talk in absolutes, Brian? You can't tell me anything absolutes because anything could happen because Wisconsin's running the air raid in 2023.
I know, right?
Like,
seriously.
You can't tell me there's any absolutes in the world.
A finesse run game air raid. Yes. I mean, it's like, okay, whatever. Who knows anymore? I'll tell you a couple other teams, Ryan, that I think have had good off seasons, and some people might not agree. Clemson didn't have a great off season because they just refused to go to the portal, but I think the Garrett Riley hire was a big one for them.
Agreed.
And it's not that I think Garrett Riley's a definite no-brainer going to be a great coach. It's just their offensive coaching has been so bad in recent years, and he's going to fit so well with what Cade Klubnik does well that I think that it doesn't – I've said this before, Ryan. This doesn't get them back, but it stops their slide. There's a couple other moves Dabo's going to have to make that he hasn't made yet that are going to have to happen before he gets them back on track. But this definitely, to me, stops the slide.
Another one, too, because I agree with you completely on that one. Washington, the University of Washington, getting back.
Gosh, yes.
Grubb as their offense coordinator, who was flirting with Alabama, obviously. You get back Michael Penix Jr. at quarterback. You get back Jalen McMillan. You get back Roma Dunze. You get back Braylon Trice. That team is they look like they could be a legit contender, not only in the Pac-12, but like they could be a playoff team next year if they put it all together because they got back some dudes, like absolute dudes. Both those wide receivers would have been drafted pretty highly in the 2023 NFL draft. I still think that Braylon Trice would have been a top 50 pick in the 2023 NFL draft. I think he's that good. So you get all those guys back. I think you also got ZTF back, right? The other defensive end, I think, came back. I know Jeremiah Martin, the other defensive end, came back. So Washington got back all of their key players, which is pretty wild.
I'm going to answer. Yeah, I think you nailed it. I mean, getting all those guys come back on both sides of the ball was huge for Washington. I'm going to enter a draft question or answer a draft. I'm going to answer a draft question, Ryan.
Do it. Love it.
From Weir and Marshall, why did Phil Jacoba go back to school and not go test out high at the combine to get drafted this year? He potentially doesn't get drafted next year. There's a far greater chance he doesn't get drafted this year than next year.
Yeah.
I mean, far greater because he hasn't played in 2 years. I mean, he's been banged up each of the last 2 years. This season did not go well. I don't think John McNulty knew how to use him at all. He played behind, without question, the worst offensive line in the Power 5 level this past season.
That's wild.
He had no draft value right now whatsoever because of the last. And then the year before, he played 4 or 5 games because he was hurt. So there was no reason for him not to come back, to be honest with you. Because if he comes out this year, he's going to go undrafted, right? I mean, there's as much of a chance of him to get drafted.
Maybe late day 3.
But that's also true next year, right? I mean, so to me, there was no reason for him to go to the draft, and unless he just was like, I'm done playing college football. But with Cignetti going to Pitt, And honestly, if Cignetti isn't at Pitt, I think there's a chance Phil may have just gone and said, screw it, I'm just going to go to the NFL and take my chance.
Yeah.
But with Cignetti at Pitt, I mean, he's going back to his hometown with a coach who helped him have success, who he trusts and respect. It was a no-brainer. Now, will it pay off? I don't know. Phil's got to prove he can stay healthy first and foremost.
Yeah.
But if it works, then I think he'll have success. And the other thing that's nice too is he's going to be in an offense he knows, and he's going to be in a conference he knows, which is going to help him.
And Pitt's offensive line is going to be much better than what he was playing behind last year. The Goncalves kid that plays left tackle is a good football player for Pitt. They got some of those dudes up front. The Mumpfield kid did a pretty solid job. They got Gavin Bartholomew, at tight end. So yeah, my question is, and this is, legitimately for We Are Not Marshall, if you want to put it in the chat, why would he have gotten drafted this year and not next year? That's why I'm a little confused on what that are we assuming that he's just going to get hurt again? Like, I don't understand exactly what that, where that thought process is. Excuse me.
Yeah. I want to say something that's not this question, but I want to get to another one here real quick. Okay. This silly debate that's been going on Twitter about whether or not Bama can claim Jalen Hurts. This is such a stupid debate. First of all, Jalen Hurts started in 2 national championship games for Alabama. 2. Yes, Alabama can claim Jalen Hurts. So can Oklahoma. That's completely different than Joe Burrow's situation. Joe Burrow never started a single game at Ohio State, ever. Ohio State cannot claim Joe Burrow unless Joe Burrow wants to be claimed by Ohio State, which he has said he does. Right? So I can't it's fun. It's a fun debate, but I've seen people get really pissed about it on Twitter. And I'm like, hey, you're taking yourself too seriously. But when you have been at a team and you've started in 2 championship games at a school, yes, they can claim you. Yes. Of course they can claim you. And some of the stuff.
It's like Troy Aikman back in the day. Like, Oklahoma probably can't claim Troy Aikman.
No.
But UCLA could definitely claim Troy
Right,
Aikman,
exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly. John A1, in a 3-3-5, does Howard Cross play more D-end? If he is a D-end in a 3-3-5 and played the same volume in 2022, does he wear down the same? I'll say this real quick. It depends on what type of 3-3-5 you're running. And the type that I think Notre Dame would run, I still think he plays nose tackle, number 1. Number 2, I'm not saying that's ideal, but who else is going to play there? And number 2, Howard Cross is going to wear down at any defensive line position. He's just not very big. And he's listed at 6'1", 276, and I think that's probably pushing it in both directions. But he's a really good football player. He just has to be on a pitch count. I mean, it's the statistics show it. The tape shows it. The more he plays, the deeper we get in the season. Right, and every year, Howard Cross's play goes down. If you can keep him in that 30 snap a game range, Howard Cross is a darn good player that can help you as a rotation guy. No question about it. Unfortunately, they've just kind of refused to kind of get some of those younger guys ready. And in some instances, those guys just aren't ready. Like in 2021, they just weren't ready. This year, you had some guys that maybe you should have coached up a little bit and gotten them ready to go. And then you had a bad break with Aiden Keanaaina getting hurt in spring, which hurt you a little bit as well. So that's my stance on that one, Ryan. Do you have a different take on that?
No, I mean, ideally, I would love him at one of the end positions, John. I mean, to your question, right? Because I think that he can be a really impactful player in the sense of the ability that he has to create some plays in the backfield, right? I think that's the thing that Howard does really well, man, is that he is a really quick football player, really quick. He's not a perfect nose. No matter what system you play, he's not really a perfect nose. Even if it was a 3-3-5 penetration style, 1 gap, like, could Howard Cross do some stuff at that nose in that spot? For sure he can. But do you want him playing at every play? Still probably not, right? Like, you probably still don't want it. So it's just where you are. I mean, hats off to Howard Cross. Like, he's playing a position that he shouldn't be playing, and he's giving you some pretty good production out of it for what he does, right? So I think ideally, man, like, hopefully Gabriel Rubio is a guy that we keep talking about, Jason Onye, like, hopefully some of these guys can take a little bit off of Howard Cross as far as doing the dirty work in 2023, because I agree with Brian. I think that if you use Howard Cross right and in the right volume, I think he could be a really impactful football player. Like, in my mind, Brian, I'm just like, can you imagine an offensive line, a guard, where you're going against Riley Mills for a few snaps, right? And then you're like, okay, finally I figured him out, right? He's long. I know where the target is. I know where my hand placement has to be. And then all of a sudden, 6 foot Howard Cross comes in and you're like, darn it, man. Now I got to redo where my target points are and how I attack him and where my leverage point is. And it could be a headache. So I think Howard Cross could be an impactful football player for the role he is, but it's just unfortunately where you are with the lack of development at the nose tackle position. You just don't really have anybody else that you trust at a high volume or multiple guys that you trust at a high volume.
Agree. Let's get to some more questions here. I want to say this real quick. If you're a fan of another team and you want to come into our chat and engage and talk, that's totally fine. We've had a Bama fan in here, Ladarius, for since our inception. Archer's been with us for over a year, but you start insulting Notre Dame fans by saying you're dealing in facts and they're dealing in opinion, you're going to get kicked out of the chat. I'm sorry. There's just no way around it. And so one of my moderators did not do that. I did that. And it's my channel, my show, and you're going to treat Notre Dame fans with respect. Does that mean you have to agree with them? No. They're wrong sometimes. I'm wrong sometimes. He's wrong sometimes. But when you start saying you're dealing in facts and we're dealing in opinions, and a Notre Dame fan can't win a debate with an Alabama fan, now you're just being a jerk to people, and we're not going to tolerate that. So we'll let you come back, which is why I just put you in a timeout, not completely block you. But that's where you cross the line. You stay away from that, and I'm cool with a lot of the stuff that you're saying. That's just the reality of it. So I just want to put that out there for those people that are coming to our chat. We always welcome people from other chats, but we're not going to let you come in here and just be insulting to people and say things like that. That's just not. And Roger Dodgers, the USC fan, we have in here. So, look, we argue, we debate, we get after it. We've allowed a lot of that, but and there he goes, and he's gone. So I had a feeling he was going to respond that way.
Oh, and I didn't see it. I didn't see it. Oh man,
just typical Bama fan. So we don't have to worry about him anymore. So I had a feeling that was going to happen. This is why I did that. So
that was Ladarius's burner. Just kidding.
Yeah, I know, right? No, Ladarius would never be that disrespectful to somebody.
Nope.
All right. Ryan Schulte says, is there an offensive system that TB12 would have the upper hand over Hartman, or do you see Hartman's experience as the biggest separator between the two, regardless of system? If we're looking at 2023, Hartman's going to have the advantage over Tyler in most systems. However, if you're going to run an offense like Oklahoma 2018, your quarterback's going to be your leading rusher. Yeah, that's one where Tyler Buckner's going to do better.
Right.
In an offense like Clemson's offense with Deshaun Watson, Tyler's going to do better. Because you know what Wisconsin or Clemson did that year in 2016? They were willing to live with the turnovers because he was going to make huge plays. That's very much what we saw from Tyler in the Gator Bowl. So assuming Tyler is that guy more than the Marshall Ohio State guy, and that's an assumption, right? Because we've seen more of Tyler being the Marshall Ohio State guy than we have of him being the South Carolina guy. I think he's the South Carolina guy, but better. But assuming that's what you get, then some offenses are going to be willing to live with that.
Yep.
Where Sam is always going to have an edge over Tyler is in a system that is a pure stay in the pocket, throw the football offense. That's just where it's going to be. So anytime you get an offense that puts more on the quarterback's shoulders from a playmaking standpoint, that's up Tyler Buckner's alley. That's going to be more where you see from Tyler Buckner, Ryan. So if we're talking about Ohio State's offense, it's Sam Hartman. That's the guy you want running that offense. If we're talking about Lincoln Riley's offense, that's a lot more debatable because Lincoln Riley has shown he likes a quarterback that can move around and make some plays off platform and some stuff like that. So it just really depends on what system we're talking about, which is why Jalen Hurts wasn't as good in Alabama's offense from a production standpoint as he was in Oklahoma's, because Oklahoma's offense was more suited to Jalen's ability, whereas Alabama wanted more of a pocket passer, which is what Tua is. I mean, Tua can run, but he's not a runner. Jalen is a dual threat guy. And so Jalen was much better at Oklahoma than he was at Alabama, in my opinion, because it was, I mean, he did some good things at Alabama. What do you have, like 16 touchdowns and one pick one year that they went and played the championship game? But he was not the impact guy. He was just kind of you know what he was? He was what Everett Golson was in 2012. Just go make some plays, but just we're not going to put too much on your shoulders because we don't want you to make a mistake. At Oklahoma, they said, hey, man, go make plays for us. Go be the dude. Go be that guy. And it fit what he did a lot better, in my opinion. So that's my stance on that one, right?
Okay.
Tommy Gunn says, will Irish Breakdown be covering the commitment announcement tomorrow? It is tomorrow. Leonard Moore is the player's name. It'll be at noon. We will be carrying that live. We will have a live show during that time, and then we'll cover that, and then we'll have a show again at 2 o'clock. We'll do our RTF show at 2 o'clock. So, yes, we will be live at noon for Leonard Moore's commitment, and we'll discuss what decision he makes and what that means for Notre Dame. So, yes, we will have that for sure.
Be there, Tommy. Be there.
Yes, absolutely. Nathan Hill says, if Tommy Reese leaves for Alabama, what would you think about Joe Brady as the next offensive coordinator? Ryan, I'll just say this and I'll let you go. I'm very intrigued by that.
Yes.
It's
a high upside pick, right? I mean, I think that, look, when we look at Joe Brady's background, everybody knows what he did 2019 to help that LSU team go from inconsistent offensively the year before to one of the best offenses we have ever seen in college football, right? Like it's been well documented. I said this yesterday, and I will back this comment up again. I think that what happened with him in Carolina as the OC shortly after that was a little bit of a scapegoat on the part of Matt Rule. The first year, he was given Teddy Bridgewater as a starting quarterback, and Christian McCaffrey got hurt and only played in a couple games that year, right? So that's your best offensive weapon, and I think we all know that there's some limitations to how Teddy Bridgewater can play quarterback, right? Despite that, still did some okay things his first year at Carolina. The next year is the Sam Darnold fiasco, right? Where you trade, you get Sam Darnold, Christian McCaffrey again gets hurt. And I think that Matt Rule just wasn't an NFL guy. Just wasn't, right? So Matt, he fired him during that season, and then it's just kind of like, oh, no, it wasn't my fault. It was Joe Brady's fault. But then the next year, it's the same story, right? So it's just like, it was Matt Rule. It wasn't really Joe Brady. So Joe Brady, I think, is a very intelligent offensive coordinator. If he is willing to recruit and be in college football, because that's the one question I think you have right now with Joe Brady is that he's been in the NFL now for a few years, right? So it's like, does he want to go and do that recruiting thing again? Because it's not for everyone, right? So I think that he would be a very interesting pick, though, because he's a very smart guy. He's shown that he can be really successful with a good quarterback. And I think Sam Hartman is a good quarterback, obviously, right? I think Tyler Buchner is a very talented quarterback that could be very good at this level as well. So I think there'd be the resources for him to be very good with Notre Dame. I think that he would bring some structural stuff to Notre Dame that would be incredibly interesting, incredibly creative. So I'm very intrigued by it. But at the end of the day, it comes down to, for me, would Joe Brady want to come recruits? Right. Does he want to be in college? If he does, then I think it would be a great hire.
Agreed.
I do think it would be a great hire.
The resources are there, like you said. You've got the quarterback now. You've got guys coming down the pike, whether it's Tyler Buchner, Kenny Minchie, CJ Carr. I mean, who was the guy when we did our player comps for the 2024 class? Who was the guy that we had this long debate about? In a private chat, you and I, like, okay, what's the quarterback that best fits CJ Carr's skill? Like, I brought up Justin Herbert because I think the body type is similar, taller, skinnier, kind of a wiry. I think he's a more explosive athlete, where Joe Burrow was kind of smooth, Herbert and Carr, but then throwing the ball, Carr is much more like Joe Burrow was throwing the ball, right? So we kind of had that debate a little bit, but the point is, as a thrower, he's more in the Joe Burrow school. Not saying he's as good, but just that type of thrower. Good, really strong arm, but not like like Herbert's got just a cannon rifle for an arm.
Yeah.
And he's not as accurate. He doesn't show the ball placement touch that Joe Burrow does. And so that doesn't really fit CJ that way. So we went more with the guy that fit CJ as a thrower, as opposed to the guy that fit CJ body type and athletic wise, right? Well, I mean, we saw what that offense can do. We've talked many, many times about how intelligent CJ Carr is. He'd be able to handle that kind of offense, in my opinion. So, and I'll tell you what, I think the offense for LSU was complex for the quarterback, but it was kind of simple for the skill players. And that's that healthy balance that you want, where you're not given 5 pre-snap checks for the receivers and then 4 post-snap potential route options. You're not doing all that. The quarterback's getting them where they need to go, and then you go from there. So I would be very intrigued. And I'll just say this, when we release our list of guys, he will be on the list of guys that we will discuss. No question.
And I would also say this too, Brian, when you lose an offensive coordinator, when you lose a coordinator in general, potentially, it's a blow to a program, right? Because now you have to answer that bell. I think Joe Brady would also bring a lot of excitement to the folds for not only Notre Dame fans, but for recruits and just the potential of what the offense could be. So I think it would be a very interesting opportunity on multiple fronts, in my opinion.
Yeah. Here's a couple more along these same conversations from Jordan Pinero. Says, assuming Tom Reese leaves, for argument's sake, would David Shaw or Chip Long be guys that Marcus Freeman calls for the OC job? We are not going to answer the question ever in a way of what Marcus Freeman will do because I don't know. Sure. So I'm going to amend your question just a little bit, Jordan, because I like the question. It's just more of, would he be guys that we would want Marcus Freeman to call? I'll answer mine, and it's yes and yes. I think you have to call David Shaw. I highly doubt David Shaw's interested in the job. I highly doubt David Shaw still has the passion for recruiting. But I do think David Shaw is still a great offensive mind. And if you could just kind of let him coach, and he's a great quarterbacks coach, because even all the struggles they've had the last couple of years, he's now going to have a second quarterback picked in the first 3 rounds in 2 of the last 3 drafts with crap teams.
Yes.
Right? What could he do with the kind of quarterback and offensive system? And what have we said? Boy, they got talent on the offensive line of Stanford, but their offensive line stinks. Well, he's going to have a Harry Easton coaching the offensive line. So you would have to call David Shaw. And then when he says no, you politely move on. Right? But yes, I would call him, and I would definitely call Chip Long as well. Look, I'd have to have some conversations with Chip about the last couple of years and what your plans are. What are the things you've kind of, the lessons you've kind of learned. But the fact of the matter is, Chip Long has shown that he can put together a pretty good offense in Notre Dame. And that was with limited quarterback play. And one of the players that hated Chip Long, and that's been an overblown thing and a character assassination by some of, some people that were just doing Brian Kelly's bidding. I've said this time and time again. I know some big-time players in Notre Dame that love Chip Long, okay? One of the players that hated him was Ian Book, because I think Ian Book doesn't like getting yelled at. However, Ian Book's 2 best seasons were his worst season was his last year when Chip Long was gone. So you can cry all you want about how you didn't like Chip Long, but you were a better player when he was your coordinator than you were when Tom Reese was. So there's that. But he had Brandon Wimbush and Ian Book, who to me are 2 limited quarterbacks, and they still scored more points than Notre Dame has under Tommy Reese. And I did a breakdown on this on my other computer, but the scoring average, just offensive scoring average, in the 3 years under Chip Long was several points higher than it was the 3 years prior and the 3 years after he left. That's not a coincidence. Despite the fact for 2 of those 3 years, he was working with an offensive line coach that he could not stand and did not want to work with. So, and Notre Dame went to a playoff berth under Chip Long too. Let's not forget that either. I mean, they went 10-3, 12-1, and 11-2 in his 3 years as the offensive coordinator. And I think the talent is better and deeper now. And a lot of the kids on the offensive roster, he recruited. A chunk of the receiving core he recruited. Deion Colsey committed while Chip Long was still here. Lorenzo Styles committed while he was still here. Chris Tyree was committed. Zeke Correll, Andrew Kristofic. All those guys actually played for a year with Chip Long on the coaching staff. So I would definitely give him a call. Would he be the guy that I would target immediately as my number one? I don't know. He'd be in my group though. And I know some people are not going to like that, and I get it. But he would be, because I think he's shown that he can coach, he can recruit at Notre Dame too. He's a very good recruiter at Notre Dame.
Well,
and he's got to promise me he ain't bringing Dell with him though. That would be in my contract. Fireable offense. If you bring Dell back with you, you're gone.
Hashtag don't bring Dell. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, but to Jordan's question, I agree with you, Brian. I mean, would I give him a call? Yeah, I give him a call. That doesn't mean just because you call someone doesn't mean that that's your guy, right? Like it's you have to build a list and you have to see what the interest is out there. Like me saying that I'll call Chip Long is not saying I'm calling Chip Long and I'm offering him on the spot. If he's
screw you, Joe Brady, I'm bringing in Chip Long.
Exactly.
I don't care if David Shaw wants to come here. I'm bringing in the first guy that I called. No, he would get very strong consideration from me.
Because if I'm the head coach, I want to see what the interest level is just in general, right? This is your first time that you're replacing a coordinator as the head coach at Notre Dame, right? Potentially. And if you do, I would want to know, like, what's the gravity here, right? What can I potentially get? What's the full scope? Because if you just settle in on 2 guys and you don't open your mind to possibilities, maybe there's something out there that you're like, oh, that's surprising. I didn't know that there would be interest from that market or this market. So I think that you cast a wide net of interest, but ultimately you know what your pecking order is, right? You know who you want, who your second option is, all that good stuff. But would I give him a call? For sure. There's no harm in giving him a call.
Right.
No harm.
Right. And would he be someone that I would give a hard look to? Yeah. But in full disclosure, I'm also no Chip very well. Yeah. So there's that too. I know more of what actually happened at Notre Dame for him to get let off than a lot of people do. And so I think there'd be a lot more people at Notre Dame that would welcome him back than not. And the people that didn't like him or want him to move on are gone. Now, does that mean he would be my number one choice? I don't know. I'd have to look into that, but he definitely would be someone I would give a look to. Get some more of these because I'm liking some of these questions we'll have. So there's going to be more of those type of things. John A1 says, great O-line show on Wednesday. Wanted to ask, what's the most physical O-line up in 2023 going across the line? Joe Alt is starting left tackle, so left guard to right tackle. I mean, I think we most physical. We kind of talked about that, Ryan. For me, it'd be him at left guard. It'd be Joe Alt at left tackle, Billy Schrouth at left guard, Zeke Krell at center, Charles Jagasaw or Ty Chan at right guard, and Blake Fisher at right tackle. That would be if we're just talking physicality, if we're just going to run out and we're going to throw the ball for 85 yards a game and not pass the ball, and we're just going to be a run it all day team, that's going to be my lineup's going to look something like that.
Yeah, mine was, so the second one you said at right guard was my initial response. I thought Blake, so I'm going right to left here for a second. So Blake Fisher, Ty Chan, just because he's such a massive dude, man. Zeke Corral, Billy Schrouth, and Joe Alt at left tackle. That was my initial thought, but then I completely forgot about Charles Jagasaw there for a second. So that's not a wrong answer, right? Like my dude is a nasty dude. And then my mind also went to like, but what if I put Billy Schrouth at center? If I'm just going for physicality, I get Ty Chan in there too. And
I think Zeke Krell's a pretty physical kid though.
He is.
I do. He plays hard.
Yes, he
plays hard. There's no doubt about that. Let's get to some more here. I thought we had a super chat down here. Here we go. Milton Fan 15 says, I'm on the fence about Tom Reese, but what accomplishments puts him as a front runner for the Bama job?
So, I mean, so Milton Fan, it's not always about just pointing at numbers for what makes a guy a great candidate, right? Because the big thing is that you understand that you are bringing him in to a different situation, right? Because you can look at Notre Dame and say, you had this, this, and this, right? Alabama, you might have slightly different, there might be a couple different things that maybe you didn't have at Notre Dame. There might be a couple things you also did have at Notre Dame that you don't have necessarily there. But regardless, I think it's more about what does he believe in? Do I think he's still improving? Because again, we're talking about a 31-year-old offensive coordinator. I think people have an assumption that he is as good as he'll ever be. I disagree. Because I'm 31 and I'd like to think that I still have a lot of room to grow and that I will continue to grow, right? So Tommy Reese, I think you look at the upside, the potential, where can he go? What does he believe in? And then you have that conversation. Like, why did they fly him into Tuscaloosa yesterday? Because they want to talk to him. They want to see it, right? Like you can talk to someone over the phone, but it's way different from getting firsthand and asking him, Tommy, if you had these resources, what is your plan, right? What would you bring to this program that could take us back to the promised lands, right? So I think there's a lot of context that is missed just based upon what did you do at Notre Dame? Because that doesn't mean that that's all you'll ever be. That doesn't mean that's all you are. There might be some things, and we've talked about this with the quarterback situation this year. Was there some limitations that you were working through at times, right? So I think that it's more about philosophically, how do you fit? And as a 31-year-old man, how much better do you still think you could be, man? Like, seriously, what's the next step for you? What's the next step to take yourself to a next level to help us to get to the next level?
Very well done, Ryan. Very well
Thank
done.
You.
We have another super chat from Wicked Bronco Productions. Hey, Brian, I know you're a Broncos fan. Thoughts on the Peyton hiring and if he can fix Russ, Notre Dame? Any reason why a lot of 24 guys like RW are trending away?
Ryan Wingo.
Right. Okay. Number one, the trending away, I think to say a lot of them are trending away is a major overstatement.
Yeah.
I think Ryan Wingo is very much in the Christian Gray category. Typical Notre Dame kid that liked Notre Dame a lot early, but now is getting all these big-time programs pushing for him. So there's going to be that pull for a while, but eventually Notre Dame will be back right in the mix. Of course, that we'll have to see now with the the changes, right? But I don't think it's trending away in the way that you think he's trending away. I don't think that's accurate. I think that's a normal thing for a kid that Notre Dame was in on early. And I don't think a lot of 24 kids are trending away. To the first part, look, Sean Payton did some really good things with the Saints. I have three really big problems with this hire. Number one, Ryan, is they gave up a first-round draft pick and a second-round draft pick to get him. Okay, great. They got a third-round pick back. But you've now given away 3 first-round draft picks to get Russ Wilson and Sean Payton. I just think that's a little nuts.
He's not Russell Wilson anymore. He's over the hill, so he's Russ Wilson now.
Right. Well, I just was kind of saying it the way that he said it.
I know.
You look, Russell Wilson's had 2 down years now in a row.
Yeah.
That's a trend. You know what I mean? And at his age, you don't often see guys his age have 2 down years and then all of a sudden come back and be great.
Right.
You just don't see that unless there's an injury you can point to. Now you could say, hey, maybe it was bad coaching, and maybe it was. And yardage wise, Russ did some okay things this year, yardage wise. But look, maybe it is offense, maybe it is coaching. I just have my doubts about it. And you paid a lot of money for a guy that's past his prime. And even if Russ bounces back, he's not going to bounce back and be vintage 2013 Russ Wilson or whatever. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like it's not going to be that's the year they beat the Broncos in the Super Bowl, right?
Yep.
So he's not going to be that guy. And you gave up 2 first-round draft picks and are paying him like about $40 million. You're paying him like he's 2013 Russell Wilson. And they got desperate, and it was a desperation move. And I hate desperation moves in the NFL because they usually cost you a lot. But the other thing too is I always get very leery of coaches who've only really had success with a Hall of Fame quarterback. Now, you could say, well, Sean Payton did go to a Super Bowl with the Giants as the OC without a Hall of Fame quarterback. They had Kerry Collins. He was a good quarterback. He wasn't a Hall of Famer.
Yep.
But overall, his primary success came with Drew Brees. They weren't that good when Drew Brees left, and that's why he's gone, basically. So I don't see a lot of reason to be super fired up about it unless I'm wrong. And I hope I'm wrong about it because I hope Sean Payton is the answer. I really do, Ryan. I really hope he is the guy that can help bring it back. I have my doubts. I have my doubts about it.
I mean, he's certainly a better coach than Nathaniel Hackett, right? I mean, we can all agree on that, right?
Yes.
Just the question are you in a situation where giving up that much capital for a coach is going to get you to the promised land, right? Because,
right.
I mean, how long do you think Sean Payton also wants to coach anymore? I mean, he's already retired once, right? So is he going to be patient to build this up for 3 years? Does he think it's going to be a quick fix because he's got Russell Wilson on the roster? Like, I just think there's a lot of potential to be disappointed with the move, but again, at the core, you upgraded the head coach position, but I just don't know if it was quite worth what you gave up, which I think is the main conversation point.
Yeah, I don't know. Like you said, okay, so they're not going to be 4-12 again. Okay, so does that mean they're 9-7, or maybe they get to 10-6 and they're getting knocked out? To me, like I either want to suck or be a contender.
Sure.
Like the worst place to be is 9-7, 10-6 every year because then you're just constantly getting like 18 to 25 spot draft picks.
That's the worst thing ever that you could be is that you have a okay quarterback that can get you to 9-7, but that always keeps you out of getting a really good player, right? Like that's where you are. That's what we call purgatory. That is not a place you want to be.
That's with a good coach they are, in my opinion. So with the roster they have right now at quarterback. Here's another super chat from Charlie Weiss's last bell loop. Since it's I don't know what MBF Mailbag Friday. Okay. If you could rewrite history with what non-Notre Dame recruit would have made the biggest difference to Notre Dame winning a national championship outside of quarterback? I know. Hard question. Thank you. I mean, I don't think it's that hard of a question. I'm still going to go back to and say Randy Moss.
That's the first person that popped in my head as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's my thing would be Randy Moss. I mean, I could look at some other players like what if Reggie Bush would have come to Notre Dame? Would Notre Dame have won a title in 05? Probably not. I don't think your defense would have been able to stop Vince Young in the championship game still. Right?
Sure.
So I mean, you can go something like that, but okay, here's one for you, Ryan. I'll go more modern times. If they would have been able to get Lamar Jackson instead of Louisville. Now, Notre Dame didn't recruit Lamar Jackson.
Sure.
But if you could have put Lamar Jackson on that 2017 team with that offensive line and that defense.
Pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
That's not bad.
Pick a quarterback in the last 5 years, and that would be one. I mean, honest, like we've said this before, if you put any of the other 3 national title or any of the other 3 playoff quarterbacks on Notre Dame's roster in 2018, Notre Dame, I think, wins a championship.
Yeah.
Trying
to think of some. Yeah.
If you could have recruited a different coordinator, can we count that?
I think so.
And then give me a different coordinator in 2015 on defense. That team had a national championship caliber roster. This is what drives me so nuts when people are like, well, Notre Dame just can't recruit championship caliber players. They have multiple times in the last 10 years had championship caliber rosters at everywhere except either defensive coordinator or quarterback. So pick a big time quarterback. And Notre Dame's got a championship, in my opinion.
Randy Moss is a really fun one to think about, though. It's just, man.
Yep.
I always hate when I see the pictures of him in the Notre Dame uniform. I'm just like, hurts my soul, man.
Makes you want to cry a little bit. Same here. Good question, Charlie. Ty has a super chat. Thank you, Ty. I understand you aren't allowed to give details, but can you say yes or no as to if Tommy Reese has made a decision either way? Thanks for everything. So I can't say yes or no because I don't know the answer, but as of late last night, a decision had not been made. Has that changed today? I haven't been given a word it has or hasn't. So, I mean, it would literally just be speculation for me, by me. So I honestly can't tell you. Yeah. Charlie Weiss's last belt loop with super chat. As a vet, perception in the military is often BS. Okay. Thank you for the super chat, Charlie. Tyler Smith says this, and I have a very strong opinion on this one. Thank you for the super chat, Tyler. What do you guys think of Scott Frost as OC?
Can I start and then let you have your rant? Can I do it?
It's not a rant. It's a very quick statement. Okay. But yes, you can still start.
I was just going to say, I think Scott Frost is a pretty sharp offensive mind, but he's not a fit at Notre Dame from a character perspective.
He's
I'll leave it at that.
Awful human being.
Yes.
Awful human being. And absolutely not. Like, heck to the no. Like, I have about 13 expletives in my head right now that I want to use to describe Scott Frost. So no, I don't want to win that way. So Sean Lucero with a super chat. Thank you very much. What is the hardest sport to officiate? That's a good question. I think it's football. I still think it's football because everything happens so violently and so fast, and there's so many more people on the mound, on the field. I think baseball is easiest because every umpire can have his own freaking strike zone.
And it's slow, and it's more slow paced.
Yes.
What do you think is second hardest? Maybe basketball, I guess. Basketball's a little hard, I guess. Maybe.
Well, for me, the hardest would be hockey because I don't know the rules. So it'd be very hard for me
in that regard.
And you have to know how to skate.
The hardest would be soccer for me because I just don't know soccer.
No, I was kidding about that. But in all seriousness about hockey, because there's a level of athletic talent you need to be a hockey official. And you're skating. You're not just moving around in you're in sneakers. You've got to know how to skate. I don't know how to skate. You know what I mean? Like, I've said this before. I put anything like roller blades, roller skates, ice skates, snowboard, skis, whatever. You put anything on my feet that's not sneakers, I lose coordination. I don't know what it is. I just can't do it.
I'm actually a pretty good skater, believe it or not. I'm actually decent at skating.
Yeah, that's good for you. So you could be a hockey official. But no, I think any of those sports.
I don't know if I'm quite good enough to be a hockey official.
The reason I say it, Ryan, is any of those sports where there's a lot of violence involved, and I mean violence in like a physical, I guess that are physical, that are as fast paced as those sports are. I mean, hockey is hockey is basically football and basketball combined, meaning it's the free flow, non-stoppage of like a basketball where the only time you stop is when there's a penalty or an end of a period, right? I'm correct on that, correct? So the only time you stop a hockey game is if there's a score, right? So that's kind of partly football. If there's a penalty, so that's like basketball, and it's free flowing like basketball. And then of course there's the physicality of football. So I think that would be and then there's just all the different rules. I mean, the things that happen with a stick are they can happen so fast. And so I think that would be another typical one. Basketball is not that hard to me because there's such a great, player. I guess at the upper levels, I don't think basketball is that challenging. At the lower levels, just two officials. Yeah, it's a lot harder.
Sure.
Like if you're like high school and some of these places only have 2 officials, it can be a lot harder to officiate. But I think that's probably the hardest.
I think it's football. Yeah. Yeah.
I think baseball is the easiest of them because from a home plate umpire, I mean, it's not easy. My dad's probably like screaming at the screen right now because he was a great umpire when I was a kid. Like he was doing a lot of high school Legion. He started to do some college games before we had to move to Virginia. But he took it real seriously. I mean, so I mean, you got to take it seriously and you got to work at it. But of the 4, that none of them are easy. But I'd say that's probably the easiest, just because of the pace of the game. And because of the fact that when you're a home plate umpire, there's so much leeway for you to kind of have your own strike zone. As long as you're consistent with it, then most people live with it. Like, hey, I know this guy's a low strike zone, so I got to keep it down. Or this guy has a big strike zone or a high strike zone or whatever. As long as there's consistent, I think you can be a good official, in my opinion. I think the bad officials, like Angel Hernandez, is a horrible official. That's because there's just no consistency what he's doing. It's just like, dude, you called that a strike last inning.
I hate that so much. I mean, you'll see it from like a pitch to pitch perspective too, where it's like this thing it's called a strike, and then the very next pitch it's called a ball. It's like that's the same exact spot I just hit.
That makes a bad official. But if dude, I've been calling this a ball all game. Don't get mad at me because you keep trying to throw there and arguing that should be a strike. I've been calling this a ball the whole game, right? And so I think most pitchers, I know as a form when I was a pitcher, as long as I know what your strike zone is, I can live with it because then I can just pitch within it. But if it's like one inning it's this and the next inning it's if one inning I'm just getting guys at the knees and you're just calling them, maybe a couple inches below the knees and you're calling them, and then the next inning I'm throwing at the guy's thigh and you're calling it a ball. Like what's going on? And then you're still, you're calling those pitches, not the same. It's just that makes it hard.
Yep. That
can make it very hard, in my opinion. Very, very hard. Let's go through some more of these questions, Ryan. We have so many good questions today. We're just not going to be able to get to all of them. I want to say thank you to Jordan Pinero, too. Just want to say I appreciate what you guys do. Love getting unbiased info, good, bad, or ugly.
Thank you.
All right, here we go, Ryan. Here's one. Ryan from 99 Problems of BK ain't one.
Yeah, and 99 Problems says, if Tommy leaves for Alabama, 1, who is the best or offensive coordinator hire? Who is the splashiest offensive coordinator hire? And 3, who is the safest offensive coordinator hire?
Well, who's the best? I don't know the answer to that right now.
Right.
And I don't think there is a best. I don't think there's one best. Who's the splashiest? I mean, we've talked about the 2 guys that would be the splashiest. It'd be Joe Brady or David Shaw. David Shaw. Yep. I think those would both be very splashy hires. Who is the safest hire? Promoting from within, Jared Parker. That's easy because Marcus Freeman knows him. I think that would be the safest. Would be
Jared Parker, and OC, Jared Parker, OC, and then maybe Dylan McCullough, your run game coordinator or something like that.
Right.
Like that. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Maybe bringing a quarterbacks coach and make him your pass game coordinator or something like that. Sure. That would be the safest. So, and I don't know enough about what Jared Parker did at West Virginia to say if that'd be a good or bad hire. I don't know the answer to that
because he was a co-OC, right, at West Virginia.
He was the play caller. He was the play caller. Whether he was co-OC or not. Now, I have heard from a lot of different people that Neil Brown was very involved in that, and oftentimes would override things and kind of do his own thing. So I think that plays into some of.
Doesn't surprise me. Doesn't surprise me at all. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, there's some of that too. So that also makes it a little bit difficult to kind of get into how good of a job did Jared Parker really do if he wasn't being allowed to do really what he wanted. That kind of fits into it as well. Some of these questions like this from Tyler Erie says, AAU basketball is ridiculous right now. Parents are out of control. I mean, there's a lot of those things that can go into a question. Like somebody had said something about like it's reffing soccer in Brazil because they try to, basically kill you afterwards. That's not what we were referring to when we're talking about hardest. We're not talking about the most dangerous. As far as just officiating, the mechanics of the officiating, I think is the thing for me. Because if you're going to talk about that, I think football is one of the easiest sports to officiate just because you don't hear it from the fans a lot. And then the other part of officiating is, well, if you're one of the sideline people, it's not an easy job because you got the flipping coaches in your ear the whole game. Yeah, but if you're out one of the coaches on the field, it's easy because you don't hear the fans. But in basketball and in baseball,
I was going to say
you hear
baseball. Everything. Yeah, baseball is probably the worst when you're talking about the parents and stuff. It's just you hear everything, man. Yeah.
It is not easy. It is not easy. I would imagine hockey's a lot like football because it's a loud environment. There's a lot of crash. There's a lot of the sport by itself makes a lot of noise. The skates on the ice, and then you've got the glass. So I'd imagine it's a little harder to hear coaches and fans. I think hockey, from a dealing with non-player standpoint, probably the easiest, because it's hard for the coaches to get in their ear, and you really can't hear the specific fans probably as well. And you've got a lot of them. Don't they wear helmets?
They do wear helmets.
So you've got that kind of covering your ears as well. So that's some good questions. Broke Neck Boy says, can Notre Dame go 12-0 so I can see them playing the Rose Bowl? Would be so beautiful. Can they? Yes. Will they? Don't know.
We'll see. Yeah.
I mean, they've done it twice in the regular season. In the last, 5 years, they've done it twice. So it's certainly possible. They'll have a better quarterback most likely this year than they had in both of those times as well. Here's a draft one for you from Tommy Guns, Ryan. Does Tennessee draft Bijan Robinson as a replacement for Derrick Henry, or do you think Henry still has some good tread left on those tank tracks?
I think that Henry has a couple years left. I mean, ultimately, though, Tommy, my real answer here is, look, Bijan Robinson is a stud, man. I think he's not going to be drafted in the top 10 most likely, but he is a top 10 player in this class. He would have
been a top 10 pick about 10 years ago.
Yeah. And honestly, Brian, I wouldn't be shocked if he ends up still being a top 10 pick just because of how good he is. He is a fantastic football player.
And even he can catch the football. And that's the thing.
Dude, he can high point the football. He's a really good pass receiver. It's insane. Tommy, I don't think so, though, just because I just don't think Tennessee's roster is quite good enough where you can just sacrifice that right now. Derrick Henry, I think, still has a couple years left. I don't think he's a very good football player. And I think that you need to figure out other portions of your roster that are maybe a little bit more important than finding the heir apparent to your running back, your Pro Bowl running back at that.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Some of these answers to our officiating conversation are hilarious. Salty Virginia Peanut says, it's fine, Brian. Today's college football officials don't know the rules either. Very well played. There was another one down here. Beefeater said tennis is the hardest one because it's too boring to pay attention for any extended period.
I kind of like watching tennis, man.
But sitting there, would you like watching it in person? I think it's a lot more fun on TV. I think it's one of those sports that's more fun to be there.
To Salty's point, though, which is pretty funny, I feel like more this football season than any that I can remember, I've sat there and been like, what are the officials doing right now?
Like NFL and college. I mean, I'm watching the playoffs, Brian.
Just like stoppage and play and stuff. I'm like, what are we doing? Like, are we moving here? Like, it's insane.
I don't know what it is. I've got a lot of theories. I don't know what it is, but officiating has, I'm watching college basketball and it's just awful. Yeah. It's gotten worse, and I don't know why. It's really strange. I've got some theories, but I really don't know why it's gotten so bad.
There was a play during the Eagles 49ers game. I forget what even happened in this football, like what the play did. But Brian, it took like 4 minutes to figure out a spot. I'm like, why did that take 4 minutes? Like, why is it taking that long? I don't understand. I don't get it, man. I don't.
Zach Felipe says, do you guys think that if Tom Reese leaves, it is a bad look in a sense that it makes Notre Dame look as a stepping stone instead of a destination? I think I'd be completely I think I'd be in error if I said there's nothing to this thought process.
I think it.
To some, they may view it that way. But look, part of the reason Tommy Reese wants this job is because of when you look at what has happened in the career trajectories of 6 of the last 7 offensive coordinators under Saban. 6 of the last 7 have gone on to much better jobs next, you know what I mean? And so, look, Jim McElwain got the head coaching job at Florida. Lane Kiffin got a head coaching job at Florida Atlantic. He's now at Ole Miss. Mike Locksley's American. Brian Dable got, the OC job with the Bills, and then that got him the head coaching job with the Giants. I think that right there is the track that Tommy Reese is, I think, pursuing as the NFL route. Bill O'Brien just got the OC job with the New England Patriots. Steve Sarkisian got the Texas job. Mike Locksley got Maryland, which I'm not sure if I said that one or not yet. So all of a sudden, if you look at Notre Dame's offense the last 2 years, Lance Taylor went from running backs coach to the OC at Louisville. Now he's the head coach at Western Michigan. The tight ends coach got the offensive coordinator job at Boston College. Notre Dame's offensive coordinator got the offensive coordinator job at Alabama, if that were to happen. Now all of a sudden you're like, dude, Notre Dame's the place to be at. because their coaches are getting big time promotions, which for most of Brian Kelly's tenure, it was like, you're going to Miami of Ohio, you're going to UMass, you're taking a lateral move back to Ohio State because they don't want you there. And Harry Hiestan's the only guy that really got a big promotion to leave Notre Dame, and that was to go be the Bears offensive line coach. You know what I mean? And so, which is the job he'd already had before. So I think that if I look at it, Ryan, I think it's a situation where to some it'll be that way, but to others it's going to look like a positive. Like, hey, if I go to Notre Dame, I mean, that guy didn't even put up very good numbers. If I go to Notre Dame and rip it up, imagine the opportunities that could come my way.
Exactly.
So I think that's going to be more of the perception in the football world than anything. I think this perception that Zach's talking about is real, but I think that exists more in the fan media talking head space. Where in the profession where it matters, I think it's more that way, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, I think we see it the same way. I would also say I don't think it's a shame to just admit to yourselves right now that Alabama's where you want to get to, right? To like, I think that that's understood, right? Like, I understand why the perception's out there. And Zach, I completely get it because I'd be lying if my mind had never gone there, right? I mean, like, that's a common thought to have. I just think that, to Brian's point, I think that it's more about what opinion really matters is what you need to be concerning yourself with. And I just don't think that where it matters most, it's going to matter as much ultimately. Like, I don't care if ESPN talks about it as like, oh, Alabama is the cycle to get to where you want to be. Like, okay, cool. That's fine. But like, does that actually affect me in any way? Does it affect Notre Dame in any way? I just don't think it really does.
Let's go to the next question. Good stuff here. Strange Things Lover edits. Oh, Stranger Things Lover edits. Okay. And then he's got a picture of Wednesday on his thing. So it's not even a Stranger Things avatar. So I'm very confused right now. But the question is, could the Tom Reese interview be a ploy to get more money and control out of Notre Dame? It is not. Yeah. The one thing that I can say for certain right now is that this is not a money ploy by Tommy Reese or his people. Now, if Tom Reese decides to stay, will there probably be a pay raise that comes with it? Yeah, probably. That's just kind of how these things work. You have to kind of have that save face type of moment, and that's usually what that does. But there's no offer Notre Dame can come back with to make Tom Reese walk away from Bama if that's what he wants to do.
Sure.
Meaning it's not about money. Right or wrong, whatever the case may be, it's not about money with Tommy Reese. So for me, that's just not, and he has about as much control as any offensive coordinator can have. So it's not about control either. So this is about a career track, and Tom Reese having goals in his mind for what he wants to do with his career, and him viewing Alabama as an opportunity to do that. That's what it boils down to, which is, agree or disagree, whatever. I think that's what a lot of coaches do.
Yep.
I personally, that's just not how I'm wired. It's like, I've put all this work into recruiting these kids. I want to see this thing through, at least to a degree, to where I'm leaving them in a little better position than I am necessarily right now. But that everybody's different, right? And that doesn't make him right or wrong or me right or wrong. It's just different. I just think I'd have a hard time doing what Tommy's doing right now, especially if I'm someone who played at Notre Dame. But he has a career path in mind, and I think he views that this is something that's going to help him with that. And based on, as we mentioned, what's happened with the last several coordinators at Alabama, you can understand why he would think that, because that's just been the path.
I like that you brought up Keon Keeley yesterday to that conversation too, Brian, because like that is the same situation, right? It's like, Keon, if you want to get to this spot, we have the proven track record to make that happen, right? So again, right or wrong, it's part of the equation. And if Tommy Reese's ultimate goal is to be an offensive coordinator on the NFL level, or to be I don't know what his ultimate goal is. I mean, we know that he definitely has an affinity for NFL football. Then I can't blame him for that. Maybe I don't agree with it, but like that's where his mind is. So I'll just respect where his mind is on that, in that regard.
All right. Next question we have here is from, let's go down to Anthony Solomon. Can you get too big of a playbook to where your players become overwhelmed? Absolutely.
Yes.
And we've seen that happen in Notre Dame a little bit. And it's not so much the playbook's size, it's what you're putting in right now. A playbook in college is going to be big because there's a ton of stuff on there, like procedural stuff, like how to do practice, how to line up, things that become commonplace. Like you're going to have stuff explaining coverages and stuff explaining gaps and all that kind of stuff where you're really teaching them the game. And that's going to take up a lot of space and that doesn't necessarily evolve a ton from a basic structure standpoint. Here's our motions, here's our terminology for formations and all that. And then there's going to be a lot of plays. I mean, you need a lot of plays to draw from. I think the issue with the size of the playbook is not that your playbook is big. It's what are you carrying into each game? That's the big thing. And because every team is going to be a little bit different. And you want to make sure that you're saying, okay, do we have enough volume to where we have stuff we can pull from to go beat this team because this look may work? Because it's easy to put in a couple plays a week and wrinkles here for each team. You're not going to run the same 5 plays every single week. And so you need some size from that standpoint. But when you're trying to carry 90% of it into a game, that's a problem at the college level. If you're maybe 70, I mean, I don't know what that that line is, Ryan, but you as a coach, you have to be really cognizant of what's the breaking point for these guys mentally, to where we're not getting as much return from them on the investment of time and playbook size. You know what I mean? And when you get to that point, you need to back off of it. And unfortunately, we've had some Notre Dame coaches who were unwilling to do that in recent years. And I think that's something that hurt Al Golden a little bit. Now, next year, the players may be better because they'll have more knowledge of it and they'll maybe play better. But then it's this cycle of this, right? And that's the thing that I think if you're not cognizant of it, that's something that can hurt you, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I do think that there's been some coaches, not Notre Dame related, that you overload. We talked about Jim Knowles before, right, Brian, where it's like overload early and then you start to get it year 2, year 3, like it starts to really mesh, right? I think that the balance is after that overload, if that's your style, you can't continue to overload the next year, right? Like you have to kind of stick to what your principles are and what that first year understanding is, right? Before you start kind of overloading again. So I just think sometimes people overcomplicate the game a little bit, man. Like I'm all for wrinkles, I'm all for creativity, but at the end of the day, you got to do things that your players can be successful for. And if you start overthinking it and putting too much stuff in, that's when players start playing slow, right? Why do people think that Maurice Loifau is slow? Because he didn't know what he was doing, right? Like that's kind of the double-edged sword you're working with. Yeah.
So one of the local beat writers is now saying that Tom Reese to Alabama is official, and that Notre Dame players have been informed. So that is official. So it's kind of what we expected, Ryan, but it is now official that is happening, that he is taking that job.
Okay.
So we can now talk about it in a little bit different detail now moving forward. So
we can.
So we'll bring up the next question. So just want people to kind of have that is official. I'm going to reach out to my sources here and make it official. So, but the people that are reporting it, it's
legit.
So it's official. Yep. Yeah. So here we go. Ryan, here's an interesting one that I want you to get to first, and then I'm going to give my opinion on it. This is from Ken Woodard. If we need a new OC, what about Utah OC Andy Ludwig? He has a balanced run pass with a physical run game. Seems like a good fit.
I think, Ken, I did a lot of research actually on Andy Ludwig last night because I think that a lot of what you're saying, I agree 100% with. He's a very versatile offensive coordinator in the sense that he's had pretty good tight ends over the last couple of years. He's had Dalton Kincaid and then the Brent Keith kid, who's a pretty solid football player that was hurt, unfortunately, this year. So he's played a lot of 12 personnel. He's been able to kind of do a lot of 11 personnel stuff as well and been pretty versatile with it. And I think the things that I like about Andy Ludwig is that, yes, he has a big emphasis on running the football. Like we've always seen that from him over the last few years with the Tavion Thomases of the world, right? As far as the big power-based running scheme. And I do think there's some multiplicity to the running scheme for Utah as well. Like I don't think it's just a power-based system where you're just a gap scheme. Like I think he does have some zone implements in there. I think I've definitely seen some outside zone from the system as well. So I think there's some multiplicity to how he uses the offensive scheme. I think he likes to get tight ends involved, which I like, but he isn't so overly dependent on tight ends that you're just a 12 personnel and that's all you're going to do, right? And Andy Ludwig is also a quarterback guy, and he's done a pretty good job with developing those quarterbacks. I would argue that Cameron Rising's not an incredibly talented quarterback, But he's gotten a lot out of him out of the last 2 years because I think that he is a good quarterback coach and a really good offensive mind. So Andy Ludwig is a guy that I would definitely entertain. There's no doubt. Like, I probably would even make the phone call personally. Again, not saying that Marcus Freeman necessarily will, but he's a guy that I have seen his name out there before. I've been impressed with what he's done. I think he's gotten a lot out of the Utah staff in general, Utah roster in general, I should say, because I don't think it's a crazy talented roster, but they've been a good program. They've been highly productive for what they've had from a talent perspective. And I think Andy Ludwig brings a lot to the table. I do.
I like this hire, Ryan, because one thing I like to look at with coaches, and it's not a direct reflection of them.
Yep.
You know, it's or I shouldn't say direct reflection. It's not an end all be all because it doesn't tell the entire story. Yep. But I kind of looking at okay, what were they before you got there? And Utah before he got there was a team that was really about, you know, defense and running the ball, and they were good. I mean, they, you know, you look at the 3 years before he got hired, they were 29.8 points per game. They were 29.5 points per game, 28.1 points per game. They were 430 offense, 413, 395.8. And then his 4 years there, they went to 429, 409, 431 and a half, and then 466.9 this year in total offense. And then from points, they immediately jumped into 32.3 his first year, 30.2 during the COVID year, 36.1 by year 3, and 38.6 by year 4. And with all due respect, Cameron Rising's just an okay player.
Exactly.
And they haven't
got a lot out of him.
Right.
Yep.
They haven't had a lot of high-level NFL players that they've been producing. They haven't put a bunch of offensive linemen out, a bunch of receivers, and a bunch of running backs out. They're just a really well-coached team that shows very good balance. And so, you know, to me, that matters. You know, the proof is in the pudding. And the fact is, they've won the Pac-12 championship each of the last 2 years, and their defense has been good, but it hasn't been great. It hasn't been as good as some of their past defenses. That's for darn sure. So that impresses me, Ryan. It really does. I mean, I really like coaches that are balanced. And this year, they passed for 3,489 yards. They rushed for 3,047 yards with a quarterback that's good. You know, he passed for 3,000 yards this year, 26 touchdowns, 8 picks, 64.7% completion rate, which is solid. You know, last year was split up. They didn't throw it as well last year because, you know, it was Rising first year. And again, he's just an okay player. Running game was not as good this year as it was last year from the standpoint of the consistency because of the health. You know, Tavion Thomas was banged up. You know, Jackson was dinged up a little bit. And so then this year, you know, you lost TJ Pledger off last year's team. And then you come out this year with all of that and you still run for about the same number of yards, 217.6. Last year's 217.2. You know, but this year they were 5.4 per carry. Last year they were 5.6. So it wasn't quite as effective, but the numbers were still good because they protected it better, where they threw the ball a little bit better and they altered how they threw the football. So, you know, in some of those regards, and these are things just me off watching him. I haven't really broken the film down yet, Ryan, to the degree where I could have a say as to why. But one thing I noticed about Utah in this last 2 years that you can say for certain is take the scheme part out of it. They had a very limited quarterback, very smart but limited quarterback, but they were physical and they were balanced and they were well coached. You could see that, Ryan. Now, I got to break the scheme down to see if it fits, but here's what I do also know. He's an old school pro style guy. He's coached for Jeff Tedford. Yep. He's a pro style guy, so there would be a smooth scheme transition, in my opinion, for the most part, into that. Yep. But, yeah, he's done a good job. And, look, he kicked USC's butt twice this year, and they kicked Oregon's butt twice last year. And that says something to me, and he's been a part of that, in my opinion.
I think the key thing that you hit on, too, Brian, is that he's been really successful with pretty average talent, in my opinion, right? I mean, like, Dalton Kincaid's a good football player, for sure. He'll play in the NFL. But, I mean, Cameron Rising is not a guy that's going to be drafted highly next year. He's not. I mean, wide receiver-wise, they don't really have a guy that stands out. Like number 17, I forget his name. He's a good little player. Offensive line-wise, they've had guys like Nick Ford who are borderline NFL players, right? Braden Daniels at offensive tackle. It's not an incredibly talented group, but it is incredibly well coached. And I think that the biggest thing for me is that they're a versatile team, you know, like they can run a lot of 12 personnel. They can run a lot of 11 personnel. They can be multiple with how they attack things. So, again, Andy Ludwig would be a guy that I would have some interest in personally. I don't know if Notre Dame will, but I would have interest. I could say that.
He's another guy that's definitely on my list. There's no doubt about it. Rob Didoff says, IB crew, I wanted to change up all the Tommy talk for a second. Brian and I grew up in the 80s. What was your favorite part of the 80s? Mine was riding my bike with friends, less worries, and Indy Natty. Man, I'll tell you what, best part of the 80s, I mean, there's so much. The music was great. I'll leave politics out of it. I was a Broncos, Notre Dame, and Boston Celtics fan, and the 80s were pretty good. Broncos played in 3 Super Bowls. Celtics won 3 titles, played in several other finals. Notre Dame won a title. It was the golden era of the Brian Driscoll fandom as far as sports. The Reds were good. They won their World Series in 90, so it was like right after the 80s, but they were still good. You had those eras. So, yeah, I mean, sports was great during the 80s for me, man, but it was a simpler time. You know, I mean, that's a big part of it. You know, I mean, you played outside. You only had a limited number of channels. You know, the Nintendo was. I mean, I remember growing up playing Nintendo, but just playing sports and just being outside all the time, riding your bike everywhere. You know, whose net are we hooping up on today? You know, just all those things were a great time. You know, just I feel like the world was so simpler. Because I was young, and the world's always simpler when you're young. And I just think sometimes the technology is so great in some ways. I mean, like right now. But in other ways, you just kind of wish you could turn it off and not feel like you were going to be screwed if you turn your phone off for an hour.
Dependent upon it, yeah.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Right.
And so I miss some of that. I do. I'm not going to lie. I miss some of that. I miss the days where there weren't as many options on things. I'm not going to lie to you. But, yeah, I mean, those are some of the things about the 80s that I miss.
Do you miss did you have a pager in the 80s too?
No, man, pagers weren't around just yet. That's more of when in the 90s when I was in high school. So I definitely had a pager in high school, and it was there was only a few people that were allowed to have that number. It was Macy something that I had that I wore to look cool, but it was really so my mom could get a hold of me when she needed to get a hold of me. That was the reason why I had a pager.
That's awesome.
Yeah, like so, mom and hey, hold on, y'all. I got to go use his phone. I got to hit this dude back. Hey, mom.
Hey, mom.
What's up?
That's funny. Hey, mom.
No doubt. Quinn Kibler says Driscoll, rank your top 5 dew flavors. For me, Code Red is king. Also, the thrashed apple and pitch black are good. I've had 2 flavors of Mountain Dews I've tried. I've tried normal Mountain Dew and Diet Mountain Dew. My Diet Mountain Dew tastes terrible. So really, I'm a traditionalist. But again, I love Mountain Dew, but it's because of the sweetness. It's not so much that I'm like a Mountain Dew junkie where I've got to try all the different flavors. I'm also not a very experimental person when it comes to food. If I got something I like, there's no need to try something new. You know what I mean? So like, why go to try the Code Red or whatever when I love the original? And I'm also trying to not talk about Mountain Dew as much anymore because whenever I talk about it, I want it. And I'm trying to not drink it right now. So here's an interesting one, Ryan, from Robert McReynolds. What do you think about pulling someone from the Kyle Shanahan tree if Reese goes to Alabama?
I mean, I love that system, but I think that there's been sporadic success with it, though. I'll say that. I think that goes for the Sean McVay tree, too, right? There's been some hits. Like, I think Mike McDaniel is a really good offensive guy at the Miami Dolphins, for instance, right? But I don't think Matt LaFleur – it's Matt LaFleur that was in the Jets, right? He's not Mike LaFleur. It's Matt LaFleur,
yes,
right? Yeah.
Yes.
So Matt LaFleur with the Jets did not do a good job, right? Mike LaFleur was pretty good. You know,
it's the other way around. Matt LaFleur is the guy that's now with the Packers.
Okay. So then Mike LaFleur's
right.
He was with the Jets and he just got let go. Yeah. So the Jets version of LaFleur, not too great, right? But there's some good, there's some bad. I like the opinion of let's go after that system potentially. Like I would think about it because I think that system is very versatile. I think it's a system that, you know, you can create a lot of mismatches. You can get in space a little bit. And I think Notre Dame has needed to do that a little bit more over the last couple of years, right? So, I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to it. It's just who's the guy, right? Like I care more about the person than the fact that he came from the tree. I need to talk to him. You know what I mean?
I think the tree matters to me from the standpoint of you came from here, let's talk.
Right.
And that's what you're saying, right? Like, so But I think that's where I would say, yes, Ryan, you and I are in agreement. Like the tree would fit really well at Notre Dame. But as we've seen with a lot of other times, some guys from a tree work well. Put it like this, Ryan, I'll ask you this. Okay, who is the better coach, Bill Belichick or Mike Holmgren?
Bill Belichick, yeah.
Okay, who's had the better success producing NFL coaches, Mike Holmgren,
Mike Holmgren,
or bingo? Right,
yeah.
so
that one staff was ridiculous,
Packers,
man. With John Gruden, Steve Mariucci, Andy Reid, like it was wild. Yeah, it was wild.
When you had Fritz Shermer was the D coordinator, he was never a head coach guy, but he was considered a great defensive coordinator back in the day. So yeah, I mean that was a great staff that he had back then. You know, Marty Morningwig, I think, was worked for him for a while too. So I mean, now Marty Morningwig wasn't as successful as those other guys, but yeah, they had some very good. Sherm Lewis was his offensive coordinator. So I mean, he had some very, very good coaches. Dick Geron was his defensive backs coach.
Oh, Dick Geron, good one.
Yeah,
I haven't heard his name in a long time.
yeah. So I mean, you know, he had some really, really good staffs. He had some really good staffs back then. So, you know, yeah, I mean, those are things you look at and you say, boy, this guy had a much better success record producing those types of coaches, and where Bill Belichick, the tree was not as successful as the one that Mike Holmgren had with the Packers, and I don't know if it was the same when he was with the Seahawks. I don't know if there was the same success or not, Ryan. That I'd have to go back.
I don't even remember who's on there, to be honest. Yeah. I don't remember.
I'd have to go back and look at some of those teams. But what years was he with Seattle? Started in what, 99? So, yeah, so 99 was his first year there. So, yeah, I mean, I'd have to go back and look at some of those teams. But he had some success there, but not quite the level of success that he had, obviously, with the Packers, because they got to a Super Bowl but didn't win one.
Right. Not to move from the conversation, Brian, because I could do this all day because that staff was just ridiculous. Can I just say, I saw someone in the chat talking about, you know, they're saying that the whole 2024 class is now gone without Tommy. I would just like to say you should go sign up at boards.irishbreakdown.com and you can see that there's a little bit of an intel conversation about that. It's all out there.
Who said that? I'm curious.
A couple different people have said that. Someone said CJD commits now. 25% of the class.
You tried to do this crap yesterday, man, and just stop. Okay, just stop. Let's be grown-ups. Okay, that's absurd. This happens every time a coach says, "Oh, they're going to lose all these other guys." Blah 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 blah, and it never happens. And as Ryan said, we already have an intel piece about this yesterday, so just chill out. Okay,
as long as Notre Dame gets the right offensive coordinator, there should be no
if
worries
they hired me
that.
as their offensive coordinator, they're going to lose some recruits. They hired some dude that works for some, if they go hire some high school coach, they're going to lose some recruits. If they hire a good offensive coordinator, the kids are all going to stay.
They'll be fine. Yeah.
And so we don't need to do that. Oh, CJ Carr's going to decommit now. Just freaking stop. Right. Okay? Just stop. If he decommits at some point in time, then we'll address that. Okay? Sure. But let's just not be there. Let's just not play that game. Let's be better than that. Okay. Let's be better than that. Here's one for you, Ryan. I really would like to get your opinion on this.
Sure.
Please compare, just from Domer Grizz, please compare, contrast the games of Michael Mayer, Kyle Rudolph, and Tyler Eifert. Thank you.
I mean, they're completely different football players. I mean, so Domer Grizz, so I'd rather just paint the picture of each player and then we could talk about some of the similarities, I guess, kind of after that. So Michael Mayer is a big, physically imposing dude who has surprising flexibility as a route runner, in my opinion. Like, there's some routes that he breaks off that are a little bit surprising, but he's incredibly competitive in the air, very competitive, strong hands. He's had some instances of just some concentration drops because he's, just kind of starting to his momentum upfield and everything. But I mean, the physicality that the dude plays with and the improvement in the run game, I thought are substantial, and he's a very good football player. Kyle Rudolph is a guy that I don't think we ever saw all the upside that he could have had at Notre Dame with obviously the injury his final year. But Kyle Rudolph is just a massive dude, incredible catch radius. He can win in the air, catch point dude, not a great blocker, but he has some effort in that department, at least at Notre Dame. That's what I saw. Tyler Eifert is very different, right? Like he's a guy that you could just throw into the boundary. You could work outside the numbers. He can, he's kind of a more of a flexible dude, wins in the air. I think all three of those guys, the similarity is that they can win in the air and they have really good ball skills to make plays in a variety of ways. But I think that you just employ them a whole lot differently, in my opinion.
What is your preference, Ryan?
Was my style preference or my preference?
Like if you were running the offense that you wanted to run, your head coach, you've hired a coordinator to run the offense the way that you would want to run it. Which of those guys would you prefer? For me, honestly, it'd be Tyler Eifert.
I was going to say
Michael Mayer is the better player overall, all around player, but I think Tyler Eifert is the guy that I think is the better fit for what I would want to do with the tight end.
Right. Yeah, mine's between Eifert and Mayer actually, because I think that you can get a little bit more all around from Mayer. Obviously, a little more upside as a blocker as long as he keeps improving. But I would say for me, like I'm a big 12 personnel guy. I really do like 2 tight end sets. So in that regard, I think that I can get a lot out of the position as far as getting a player that can play in line and then also moving Tyler Eifert around a ton, right? So I think I would also lean Eifert, but I don't think Mayer is a wrong answer, obviously, because he can do a lot of different things and you can supplement production differently.
Here's another one for you, Ryan, from Bill Walsh. What offensive line player currently in Notre Dame, so not Jagasol, that's not named Blake Fisher or Joe Alt, is most likely to be drafted someday?
Most likely to get drafted someday. I mean, I think the first person that comes to mind, Bill, is Billy Schrauth. I think that he's a pretty easy one because the way, me and Brian talked about him a ton yesterday. He's a very interesting combination of size, physicality, and athleticism, right? I think when you look at like Zeke Correll would be someone that probably would be like, oh, maybe Zeke Correll get drafted. It's not impossible. But what I would say about Zeke Correll is that Zeke Correll isn't the biggest guy of all time, right? So there's going to be some NFL evaluators that are going to look at Zeke and say, is he a little smaller, maybe a little scheme specific? Like you're going to use those types of terminologies with a guy like Zeke Correll. Billy Schrauth, I don't think he's a scheme-dependent football player. Like I could see him growing and being that 6'4", 310-plus pound offensive guard that could be in a power-based system, could be in a zone-based system. It can do a little bit of everything, right? So I think he's a guy that could get drafted if he develops properly. If Emil Wagner can put on enough weight and hold it, I mean, that kid's a high draft pick most likely if you get the most out of him because he's incredibly talented. So first 2 guys off my head were those. I think Billy Schrauth and I think Billy Schrauth and Emil Wagner definitely have that type of upside, but I think Billy's the cleanest one because you're like, he can already hold the weight, right? He can already hold the weight. He's really athletic. Emil's a little bit of a projection just because you just don't know how much weight he's going to be able to carry on his frame.
Sorry, I couldn't get back to here. I'm trying to publish that story and get it all out and all that kind of stuff. So
no, you're good. You're good.
Here's one from Sean Green. If you could choose, if you could only choose one road game on the 23 schedule to go to, which game would you choose? That's easy. It's Clemson for me.
Yes. I've never seen the running down the hill and all that type of stuff, cool. Right? Like that's pretty wild, man.
And in my limited experience with Clemson fans, they were pretty cool. Like they've been pretty cool. Yeah, like in person, they were very friendly and fun. Unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to meet them in the 2020 regular season game, but I ran into a bunch of them at the ACC title game, and then, of course, in the 2015 game when I was down at Clemson for that game. Really, they're a lot like Georgia fans. Like when they talk trash, it's like in good fun. It's not vulgar. It's not like going to a Ohio State game, where their fans are just the worst. It's or Michigan fans. It's fun. It's like, oh, you guys, it's all in good fun, and I enjoyed it there. And man, the smells on campus at Clemson in Georgia when I went down there, even though the Clemson game was rainy, there were still people grilling and cooking.
It's wild.
And you're like, man, I couldn't imagine what it's like on like a sunny day.
Right.
So yeah, that was great.
Well, that's definitely one of the top couple places I want to visit. I really do. Because I'll also say I always go on this Clemson radio station. It's one that I like frequent. And there's some fan bases, Brian, where like you go on and they disagree with the take that you say and they just get really mean, right? Like they get just like so disrespectful. Yes. I've never had that experience with the Clemson radio station. They're all very like, and even the guy that covers them is always just like, I really respect Notre Dame. Like I think that they are going in a great direction. I really do think because Clemson hasn't always been a blue blood, right? Like they've had the build up and they've been that team that like understands lack of success. They understand building. So I think that there's some mutual respect in that regard.
Yeah. And I think the fact that Notre Dame has had some success against Clemson. I mean, look, Notre Dame has beat Clemson. What is it? 2 times. And then, so what are they? They're Notre Dame's 2-2. No, 2-3 against each other, right?
Yeah.
Notre Dame's won 2, Clemson's won 3. Well, 2 of those games weren't competitive, but the other 3 were. I mean, even the game Notre Dame lost in 2015, that was a game that Notre Dame had a chance to tie at the very end of the game.
Yeah.
So I think there's that too. I think that's partly why Georgia fans respect Notre Dame a lot more than Alabama fans. Part of it's because Alabama fans don't respect anybody. Some of them. The other part is, well, Notre Dame's given Georgia a game both times they've played. So there's, in Alabama, they've blown Notre Dame out both of the 2 times they've played. So that's going to factor into it as well. Yeah, Ryan.
That's the mutual respect conversation, right? It's like we're the SEC team. You're a Notre Dame that hasn't been relevant and blah 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 blah. And then you went toe to toe with us and you punched us in the mouth, right? And you were in the game at the end. So I think that's the mutual respect. Yeah. I agree.
Yep. Here's an interesting one. Here's a recruiting question from Salty Virginia Peanuts. If Caleb Brewer commits to in place tackle at Notre Dame, what with his tight end skills could Notre Dame use things like tackle eligible plays? Also, please drool a bit on his potential. So the quick answer to that first one, Ryan, is yeah, absolutely.
Especially in the red zone, right?
He legit catches the football, right? So did Joe Alt.
Yes.
May never come to that situation, but I mean, yeah, I could see it. But Ryan, I know you and I are both extremely high on Caleb Brewer, and I don't care what his rankings say. That's a kid that's got a lot of talent. Like Ryan sent me his highlights first time he watched, and he was like, "Dude, you've got to watch this. This is just stupid." And so I was like, man. "Okay, this is interesting." It's like it was like 10:30 at night, and you're usually in bed by then too. So I was like, "Okay, this guy's pretty fired up by this guy." So
I don't know if you've noticed lately, though. I've been up a little bit later.
Yes, you have. I feel bad for you. Yeah, I feel a little bad.
No, but it's Salty, I think the first thing I said to Brian about Caleb Brewer was this highlight tape is silly. Like, it's silly. Yeah. Like, why is this happening right here, right? The first play at 6'5", 300 pounds, because he was legit like 295 last year. He obviously had to cut weight to make, the 285 for wrestling this season. But he was a legit 295 getting a tight end screen on the first play of the game and going for like 40 yards. It's just like, why is this a thing right now? Like, why is this a possible? And he plays at Wyoming missing. So like, he's playing with, what was the Javen Williams was the kid that came out of there that's going to Penn State, right? I mean, they play some good football teams.
By the way.
Yeah. Very talented kid.
That's a dude.
Yes. But Caleb Brewer, Salty, is, because you say drool about his potential, but it's hard not to, man. Like, honestly, he is 6'5", 300 pounds, and can move. I look forward to seeing what his arm length is, because I know there's going to be a conversation of, is he a tackle? Is he a guard? And that's usually kind of the determiner for most opportunities. But he's got such good foot quickness. I'm not really worried about it. Like, I think he's going to play tackle potentially on the college level. If not, he can be a dang good guard, right? I mean, there's just that type of upside. But he's just a really, really talented football player. Brian mentioned, obviously Joe Alt with a tight end background. Mike McGlinchey was another guy with a tight end background. Those guys tend to usually work out. Those guys that have the frames to put on that weight that are for tight ends, I just love that foot quickness, man. Caleb Brewer is a very talented football player. And I would say this, year one, if you don't know if he's going to be more than a 4-year player, let's say, if Caleb's that good, down here at the goal line, you want to put an extra tackle in the game and get Caleb Brewer on the field? Like, heck yeah, baby. Let's do it. I'm all for it.
Ryan, let's go to another one here. So, Christopher Crosby, this is I want to bring this up from Mike Sullivan because this is a really interesting dynamic.
Okay.
So this is said before this whole thing broke. He says, if I say if Tom Reese goes to Bama, that has now happened, and has a bad year, it could be tough to rebound from. If he has a bad year at Notre Dame, people will blame the players. And the point being at Alabama, they'll blame the coaches. And that is a very interesting dynamic. And every fan base will blame both sides to a degree, but it has been weird watching Notre Dame fans the last 7 or 8 years where most of the time when things go wrong, it's almost always the players get blamed. And it's never the coaches, because I think that's the culture Brian Kelly created. It's never my fault. And therefore can never be one of my assistant coaches' fault, because if it's their fault, then it ultimately it's my fault. But if the players aren't good enough, that's a different conversation. And so you see all these excuses. Well, I have good enough players. I can't recruit, blah, 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 blah. Right? At Alabama, like players will get blamed, but you're going to get blamed even harder because you make the most money. And even in the NIL world, if the deal that I was told he's going to get is accurate, and again, he's not leaving for the money, but he's still going to get a big pay raise. Most of the players won't be making more money than him. Yes. So it's going to be if he thinks Notre Dame fans were pretty rabid after a loss,
Oof. Yes. Especially if that loss is to like an Auburn or something like that, right? Like, yes. Agreed.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting, man. I mean, I wish Coach Reese success, right? Like, I hope he does a good job, but it's going to get tough if things aren't perfect, right? I mean, that's the expectation in Alabama, right? The expectation is to score 40 plus points a game and win national championships. And if he does, and if they don't, it's going to be a lot of the blame. There's no doubt.
Absolutely. Let's get to some more here. We got Christopher Crosby says, I live about 20 minutes from Springfield, Ohio. I've seen Aaron Scott. He's as advertised. Chances Mike Mickens can pull him out of Ohio. They're not great at this point in time. Notre Dame likes him. They're recruiting him hard, but it's one of those things where it's going to be a tough pull. It's going to be a really tough pull for me.
It is.
Yeah, but he likes Notre Dame a lot, and they're trying, but I just think getting him out of Ohio is going to be tough. It's going to be tough. I mean, I think Ohio State's kind of the team to beat for him right now, and
for sure.
That's going to be the case. That's going to be the case.
No
All right, let's get to this next one here. So, Indy Irish 25. This is a name we heard a lot. Is Brian Hartline ready? If Tommy touchdown, Tommy heads to Alabama. Well, obviously, he's heading to Alabama now. Look, Brian Hartline for me is not a guy that I'd go after. I know that some are going to say that's silly, but like, number one, he's been a coach. If you didn't think Tommy Reese was ready to be the offensive coordinator in 2019 or 20, what makes you think Brian Hartline's ready to be the offensive coordinator now? Right. Because he won't have a Ryan Day to help him at Ohio State the way that he does now. So look, he's been a great recruiter. There's no questioning his receiver coaching skills. But for me, Ryan, I mean, and that's evidenced by how well his receivers do the minute they get to the NFL. I mean, they Ohio State's as good as any team in the country. I would say better at their receivers getting the NFL and being ready to play right now at the present moment. Right now, the track record's not super long because he hasn't been there very long. But Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave were far more technically ready to play as rookies than Jerry Jeudy was, or Henry Ruggs was, or Jalen Waddle was, in my opinion.
They both just had 1,000 yards as rookies too.
Right.
So I know there's the extra game, but still.
Right. But they were significantly better, and I think it's going to continue. I think that's something that helped Jameson Williams thrive at Alabama last year, was the preparation he got beforehand. So I think Ohio State is at the point now where, that's all great, but that's a whole different thing than being a coordinator where you're the guy completely in charge of the offense, because he's not going to be completely in charge of the offense at Ohio State. Ryan Day's still going to be there. Yep. So to me, I think that's kind of where I'm at, Ryan, is he would not be at the top of my list, to be honest with you. I want a guy that's done it before. A guy doesn't have to be 50 years old, but I want a guy that's done it before. And here's why. What I believed before Tommy Reese left is what I believe now. You got to just stop looking at the chat because it's just going to make you mad.
It's the Wake Forest offensive coordinator thing, man. Yeah. Like, it just always gets me.
Here's the deal. What I believed about Tommy and this offense next year stays the same. I believe that the pieces are in place for this Notre Dame team to make a run if some things can go their way. I wholeheartedly believe that. I don't want a coordinator coming here learning on the job. I don't.
Yeah.
I want a guy that can come in here and has some level of a proven track record to say, you feel like this guy can get this thing going quickly, because I don't want to waste this window. You can't guarantee me you're going to be able to do that. Notre Dame wasted a window from 15 to 17 because of the foundation that was laid under Brian Van Gorder. They wasted a chance to compete for a championship in 2015 because they wasted the defensive coordinator and the strength program were both terrible, right? And so for me, Ryan, I don't want to waste this window because I don't know if you're going to get another one. You can't guarantee me you're going to get another window like this. And so I want to bring in a guy that I know can design and call an offense and teach kids how to play football.
Yeah.
Could Brian Hartline in 4 years be a better offensive coordinator than Andy Ludwig, for example, a name we mentioned? Certainly.
Yeah.
Certainly. but I don't know that he'll be that next year, and I would bet against him being that next year.
It's fair.
And that's not even getting into the fact that why would he leave Ohio State, his alma mater, to come back to Notre Dame for the same job?
And can I say this? I don't know if like I saw this report, Brian, that so Hartline's getting the opportunity to kind of prove himself as a play caller like this offseason, and then it's like an evaluation to see if he's going to call the offense in the fall. Did you hear that? I was like, that's weird, man. Like that. I just find it weird that that's the situation when he's been on the staff. Like Ryan Day knows him obviously very well. I just thought that was kind of a weird dynamic. So, I mean, yeah, I'd rather have a proven guy because I still think there's other guys out there that you could just look at and say like, you know, there's upside to him that's untapped and more of a known commodity for sure.
Absolutely. Let's get to this next one, Ryan. I'll answer this one really quickly. From MGO Irish, did the Irish have any sincere interest in 2024 running back Jordan Marshall of Archbishop Moeller? Notre Dame was not in his top 4. He dropped yesterday. No, they were never really interested in him. There was a level of interest early on, Ryan. He was at the camp this summer, and they've offered 2 backs from Irish Invasion. He's not one of them. And he was solid there, but Aeneas Williams moved at a different level than Jordan Williams. Darian Dupree moved at a little different level than Jordan Marshall, I should say. So he's a good back. He's a 4-star back for me. He's a good player. I just feel like there was better players on the board for Notre Dame in this class, and that's why they just never really made a move on him. And they'd have had a shot with him, right? If they'd have taken him, but they didn't really make that move. Here, I'm just going to read this, Ryan, and I want to get your reaction. Christopher Crosby, can you think of a stranger combination of coaches than Luke Fickell and Phil Longo? I don't see how that works. It seems odd to me. 1, 2, 3, go.
I mean, I don't even think it's really like Luke Fickell and Phil Longo as much as it is the air raid in Wisconsin, right? Like that's the weird part. I mean, I honestly could see Luke Fickell with an air raid coach. Like, I don't think that's like the weird part where I'm just like, that is stupid. That doesn't make any sense, right? But it's the fact that you're going to Wisconsin that has traditionally, for as long as I can remember, and as long as most people probably can remember, has been a power running team, right? Like they are running downhill and they are running right at you. And then all of a sudden you're going to bring in an air raid offense to take you to the next step. Like, I just think it's very odd. It's very odd. So in that regard, yeah, I guess it's a very weird pairing because, I mean, just that the fact that Luke Fickell is now the coach of Wisconsin, and you would just consider like, hey, he's going to continue doing what Wisconsin has traditionally done as a offensive football team. Now you throw in that Phil Longo is his offensive coordinator. That's the weirdest thing, man. Wisconsin with an air raid. It's just wildly weird. Wildly weird.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. I just, I don't get it. And I think you nailed it, Ryan. The Longo to him theory is nice. Look, there's a lot of people joining the show right now because of the Tom Reese thing. We'll address that here in a minute. This is more of a mailbag show. We are going to get into that here in a few. But Ryan, you and I are also going to do a show tonight at 8:00 where we will talk. So here's what we'll do tonight. We're going to go into more detail about the whole Reese thing, kind of the backstory, and then we'll dive into some of the candidates that we like. We'll dive into some of those guys, and we'll try to gather some intel between now and then as well. So yeah, there'll be a lot more to that. Is Dan from Gavin Hart? Is Dan Mullen a call you would make? Not for me, no. Personality wise, and honestly, here's one of the advantages of a guy like Andy Lugwood, he's a lifer assistant.
Yeah,
he's 58. He's not going to get a head coaching job, right? That's just not kind of to me where he is. He's an assistant coach. Dan Mullen's going to come to Notre Dame if that were to happen, and the first chance he gets to leave to be a head coach, he's going to take. And so that's fine, but how invested is he going to be in recruiting? Because a guy like that, here's why. A guy like that knows if I bust my tail to recruit here, that means I'm recruiting against myself when I get a job in a year or two. That's the reality of it, subconsciously or consciously, and they're just not going to do that. The troll sniper said, sucks that Phil Longo just signed a contract with Wisconsin. He would have been perfect. I like what Phil Longo does. I think he does a lot of good things at Wisconsin, at North Carolina. That's not a fit for Notre Dame for a lot of the same reasons I don't think he's going to be a fit at Wisconsin. He runs a very passive rushing attack, and I just don't think that system would work incredibly well at Notre Dame.
And can we please stop with Josh Gaddis, please? I really don't want to talk about Josh Gaddis ever again in this chat, folks.
Can you just speak on that a little bit? So for me, here's why, right? To me, I think it was a good position coach and a good recruiter. That was a very overrated coordinator, and the dumpster fire that his offense was at Miami this year kind of set it. See, at Michigan, he had Jim Harbaugh kind of setting the tone. Jim Harbaugh was for that offense what Brian Kelly was for the Notre Dame offense. Is you may be the OC, but we're going to do it my way, and they're going to have that influence. And Jim Harbaugh is even more involved in the offense than Kelly was in the end of his career at Notre Dame.
Yeah.
So that was still Jim Harbaugh's offense, which is why this year's offense looked exactly the same as last year's offense.
100%.
That's what it is for me with Gaddis.
Yep. That's it. I mean, that's it. I don't have proof that he's a great offensive coordinator. I just don't have any proof on it. And I mean, the fact that he was fired after 1 year at Miami, I think is very telling for a lot of different reasons, right? Like, it's not just the fact that he isn't good. It's also the fact of, like, there's got to be some cause for why that ended so abruptly, right? In a transitional year. So we'll leave it at that.
We're going to work through some super chats here, and then we're going to get out of here because, again, tonight at 8 o'clock, we are going to go live again, and we're going to break this all down. So we're going to kind of skip over a lot of the questions about coaches that we would look at because we're going to discuss a lot of that tonight. So we'll answer your questions about guys that you like as well. So I want to kind of, because there's some really good questions we're gonna miss here, guys. But I really, guys and gals, but I really want to get to the super chat so we can get going and start. Because honestly, I need to get on the phone and start like doing some diving into kind of what's next and all that kind of stuff. Charlie Weiss, last belt loop, said, speaking of violence in sports, that's why I love Drake Bowen. That kid brings violence when he hits someone. Imagine Drake and Snead hitting a kid. Wow. I agree with you completely.
Yes.
I'm going to add something to that, though. Part of the reason I love Jaden Osbury is because he's that way as well, but he's not as big and strong as Drake is now.
Right.
When Jaden Osbury gets into a college weight room, I think that kid's going to be an absolute monster physically, because he brings a lot of violence now in a 205-pound frame. When he gets up to 225, and that's why I compare him to John Vilma. I don't see Jaden Osbury. I hope he's never like a 235, 240 guy. That's going to be too big.
No,
but if he can get in that like 225, tops out at 230, he's going to come with some force. And I'm telling you, that kid, those two kids a year after getting Ziegler and Jalen Snead, boy, the linebacker position is in a great position. It really
is.
I'm going to somewhat address this one up. Look, Tyler Smith, the super chat, start one, bench one, cut one. I'm not cutting any of them. If I could start one and bench one, I mean, look, here's the great thing about this question. I don't have to do any of those things, those last two things. I don't have to bench any of them, or I have to cut any of them. And, why would I want to start any of them, and why would I bench them? They're three really talented running backs. I'm going to use all of them.
Yes.
And play all of them. So it's a little bit of a cop-out answer, Tyler. I apologize for that, but the reality is I'm not going to tell you who I'd cut. And I'm just glad we don't have to make that decision, because you can use all of them. And I'd say the best games Notre Dame had this year offensively were games where all three of those guys were making plays.
Oh, no doubt.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody can argue that either. Like, I mean, the proof's in the pudding in that one.
Exactly. Got a super chat here from Not Ryan's Bully, a.k.a. Tommy Guns. I dislike all Tommies right now. Good luck to him, I guess. Except for you, Tommy. We don't dislike you. I
hate all Tommies. Just kidding.
Hey, be kidding. Nice.
I was
John A1 says, is Mike Denbrock a guy Coach Freeman should call? I'll say I love Mike Denbrock. He's one of my favorite people in the business, and he's a good offensive coordinator. But I don't think it fits because of the way the current staff is made up. Because he's not a quarterback's coach. He's a receivers, tight ends, or tight ends tackles coach. And he's not a guy that I'd have coaching quarterbacks. And right now, with the way the staff is made up, the biggest priority for me, if I'm Marcus Freeman, is the Dylan McCullough, Harry Heastan, Chancey Stuckey, Jared Parker. I want to keep as many of those guys in place as possible. Harry Heastan being at the top of that list.
Right.
And so I want to bring in a coordinator that can work with the guys that I have, because I've got a great offensive assistant coaching staff. If I can give me a really good offensive coordinator to work with those guys, it's going to be phenomenal. So as much as I love Mike Denbrock as a person, as good of a coach as I think that he is, I don't think the fit is right. That's why, when we talk tonight, we won't be talking about Alex Atkins from Florida State, because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit player-wise, or staff-wise. Doesn't make a lot of sense there, even though we like some of the stuff that he does. There's other guys that we could talk about. Jeff Grimes is a guy that a lot of people want to talk about. Doesn't make sense. He's an offensive line guy. So it doesn't make sense to bring him as an offensive coordinator. I think he's a little bit overrated as an offensive coordinator. I mean, they've had some good offenses at Baylor, but he hasn't shown me they can be an elite offensive coordinator. I guess not overrated, but just not worth some of the hype that people have about him. But even if he was, Ryan, it doesn't fit, because then you got to get rid of Harry Hiestand. And give me Harry Hiestand and whoever else you want as offensive coordinator over Jeff Grimes coaching offensive line and whoever you're going to hire to be your quarterback's coach. I'll take the Harry Hiestand combination every day of the week. Mark 1, Brian, do you have your resume ready? So the only person that I care about employing me is myself, and I don't need to give myself a resume. I love what I do, and there's no way that Notre Dame would consider my resume anyway, nor should they, because I have not coached in forever, and I have always said I would never give my resume to Notre Dame while I'm doing a job like this, because it would create so many problems. So then if you all knew that I applied for a job, let's say I applied for an analyst position, hypothetically, and I didn't get it. Every time I criticize the coaching staff on offense or Marcus Freeman, it would be like, man, you're just saying that because he didn't hire you. And so it would just be such a bad idea and a bad look. So the only time I ever sent a resume to Notre Dame was when I was in coaching, and I sent one for like a GA position that I knew I wasn't going to hear back from. So yeah, that's not one that I would ever do. And I like what I do here. I don't know why Mark's trying to get rid of me, Ryan. That kind of makes me sad. Mark's trying to get rid of me. I'm just kidding. Tyler Reese says, feel like we can't catch a break. Definitely a big loss for us. Freeman has a tall task in front of him. Thank you for the super, Tyler. It's a loss, but I don't think it's a big loss, and I think it's a loss that you can overcome. There's a lot of good candidates. I mean, Ryan and I had this talk last night. Like, there's some guys on there, like, boy, if they brought this guy in, I'd be pretty fired up. Gee, I wish they could make this guy work, because there's some good guys out there. And the pieces are in place for this thing to really get rocking and rolling, in my opinion, Ryan. I really do believe that. I really do believe that. Let manager 1. I got to admit, I do love the idea of Tommy running up the score on LSU this year. How phenomenal would that be? Like, I know one game I'm rooting for Tommy Reese like crazy, man.
I would love to see the post game between him and Brian Kelly. That'd be fantastic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Adam Shipley with a super chat. Thank you, Adam. What does Reese leaving do to your projections for the record and development? It is affected by them having to install a new offense. Adam, honestly, I have to see who they hire first. That's a very fair question. Very fair question. But I can't honestly answer it until I see who they have. You know, because there could be a scenario where, like, boy, that's a pretty smooth transition. And others where I'm like, you hired the dude from Western Kentucky who's at Oregon now, I think, right? Or I forget where he is. I think he's at Oregon now. Or no, Will Stein's at Oregon. Yeah, but I forget where the Western Kentucky guy is at now. But I'm like, dude, that guy's an air raid. That's a completely different offense than what you're doing now. Yeah. And so I just don't think that would make it as much sense. I'm going to bring this up because it's a super chat, Ryan, from Blake Kajar. Would you go after Ryan Grubb and Josh Gaddis? We've already addressed Gaddis. What's the other one?
Ryan Grubb just turned down Alabama, so I just don't know if he's on the market, right? Like, I mean, I would think about it, but I just don't know if he's a guy that would have any interest of leaving. Like, if he didn't want to leave for Alabama, I'm not so sure he wants to leave, in my opinion, at this time.
I'd make a call, sure, because I love Kalen DeBoer's offense, and I think you could transition to it well at Notre Dame. But yeah, you're right. I mean, you make the call, just see if there's, because maybe he just doesn't want to go to the Southeast. Maybe he doesn't want to work with Saban. Maybe he doesn't want to go to Bama, but he'd be open for a better opportunity somewhere else. Maybe that's it. So you at least make the call, right? But I think I think that's kind of where I would be. Jay Clampett Investments. So now that it's official, who is on your short list? I'm really intrigued by the dude in Utah. So that's Andy Ludwig. We're definitely going to talk a lot more about Andy Ludwig, Jay Clampett. We're going to do a show tonight at 8 p.m. where we're going to kind of talk about everything and then dive into sort of what is our list tonight. That'll be at 8 o'clock tonight. So definitely want to tune back in for that one, and we'll have a lot to say about that. Mark 1 says, just in, Saban got Tommy on his boat, seeing if he knows how to water ski. Well played. Mike Farina with a super chat. Thank you, Mike. To clarify, with Hartline calling plays in the spring, essentially, unless it goes horribly, he is expected to call plays next year. They're just hedging. That's fine, Mike. But my point is, he's not going to be the only guy in the room on offense. That's kind of where I'm coming from, right? Whether he calls plays or not, I never say anything about he's not going to call plays. I didn't say that. What I said is he's not the guy driving the offense. Brian Hartline doesn't come in there and say, hey, Ryan, I'm going to run this offense next year. It's different from what you ran, but I'm going to – no, he can't do that. He's running the offense that Ryan Day is saying, here's my offense, go run it. I mean, He's going to put some wrinkles on it, as every coordinator does, but he's running Ryan Day's offense. And if Ryan Day doesn't like it, he's going to tweak it. And trust me, Ryan Day is going to have plenty of opinions about the offense. And he should. I mean, why shouldn't he? So
he was talking about my comment because I just think that it's a little telling that he's not getting like the full reign right now, like it's a test period. I think that that's a little like fishy in my opinion. So
I got you, but I think part of that's because, in my opinion, if I'm Ryan Day, I'd rather do it that way, and then you prove to me you can handle it, and then I hand it over to you, as opposed to me giving you full reign. Spring doesn't go well, and then I've got to then come in and you know what I mean, right? So like to me, it's that. It's let's start here, and then if you are what I think you are, then I can back off further, and then that the perception is, wow, he did so well that Ryan Day's completely handing off. Or if the opposite happens, you're like, I need to be a little bit more involved than I thought I was going to be. Then that gives the perception that Brian Hartline's not ready or not capable. So I get where Mike's coming from, and it is a little fishy. It tells me that he's not sure if he's ready or not yet, because he's not sure if he's ready to be a full-time guy, which is my whole point. At Ohio State, you can get away with that because you've got a great resource in your head coach. Marcus Freeman is on record as saying, I'm not an offensive guy. So you don't have that same resource that you have at Ohio State. It's a different. The defensive coordinator will have that resource at Notre Dame, but the offensive coordinator doesn't, and that's the point. And that's why Brian Hartline would not be a guy I would bring in. It makes a lot more sense at Ohio State than it does in Notre Dame, in my opinion. And that's where I'm coming from. Connor Grant said, would you prefer a better X's and O's guy or an amazing recruiter if you had to choose? If I can only have one of those two things, give me the amazing X's and O's guy. As the coordinator, position coach is different, Ryan. As a coordinator, because if the X's and O's are amazing, then my offense is going to speak for itself. And that's going to help with the recruit. And then we can hire assistant coaches that are great recruiters. Mm-hmm. So yes, I would rather.
Especially with where your staff is right now from a recruiting perspective on the offensive side of the football. I agree.
Exactly. Mark 1 says it was a compliment, Brian, on the resume. I know, buddy. I'm just giving you a hard time. But I have actually gotten that question seriously from other people. And I just want to explain to people why I would never do that. Number one, if I was Marcus Freeman, I wouldn't hire me, right? Because of the fact that I haven't coached in almost a decade. But number two, it would create a ton of conflicts of interest, in my opinion. But I have had some people that have asked that, Mark. I knew you were just kind of being fun and giving me a compliment, and I do greatly appreciate that. I believe this is the last super chat that we have, Ryan, and this is from Beefeater. It says, how much of last year's bad offensive plays were due to Tommy's play calling versus poor execution and Pine checking out of the play called? Well, Pine rarely checked out of the plays last year.
Right.
I think a lot of last year's success, as we have said, was down to poor execution. I mean, we've said this all along. You had guys, even in bad games where I didn't like Tommy's game plan, there were still guys coming open that the quarterback wasn't throwing the ball to that would have resulted in it, because it wasn't just Drew Pine, because it was Tyler Buckner against Marshall. Whether it's Buckner against Marshall and then Drew Pine against Stanford, the quarterbacks weren't getting the ball out to open guys, right? If Tyler Buckner hits Braden Lindsey on a wide open post route at the end of the second quarter, Notre Dame wins. If Tyler Buckner reads the corner correctly on a third down play that led to, I think, a field goal against Marshall, and Notre Dame wins. They're up 15-2. You remember 15-12. Remember the play I'm talking about? It was like a third down play. The corner squats. Braden converts it to a go route. There's no help over the top. If Tyler reads that correctly, it's one of the easiest touchdown passes he'll ever throw. And it's now all of a sudden 22-12, and it's ball game, right? Okay, you can maybe say the coach didn't do a good enough job teaching Tyler that conversion, but you can't tell me that it was a bad play call, right? And so he's the offensive coordinator and the quarterback's coach, so it's up to him to teach those guys how to do that. So there's some of that. But as we said before, even in some of the bad games, there's guys running wide open that the quarterback won't throw the ball to. So it was mostly about, to me, if you want to criticize Tommy Reese, play calling isn't really the area I would go with. Now, use more run games. We've had some of those criticisms, but the play calling was good enough for you to win every game you played this year in the regular season. The execution wasn't there. That's also part of the coordinator's job. That's where he had to get better, was getting certain parts of the offense to execute better. The play calling by itself, just outside of all the other aspects that go into the success of the play calling, he was designing plays to get guys open every game. Ohio State, Marshall, Stanford, USC, all of them. So, but that's only one part of being a great coordinator, and that's what we've always said. That part I've never had a problem with Tommy. It's some of the other stubbornness things that we have a little bit of more of an issue with.
Yep.
Last one from Adam Shipley. Thank you, Adam. Looking forward to 8 p.m. Me too. It is going to be a busy couple hours. I got to go make spaghetti sauce tonight too, Ryan. I promised my wife that I would make spaghetti tonight. So I got to go make some spaghetti sauce here in a little bit and get rocking and rolling. But I do want to thank everybody for being with us today. Very lively chat today. A lot of great questions. I wish we could have got to more, but if y'all want me to have more intel tonight when we do it at 8 o'clock, I need to get off there now and go start making some phone calls. So anyway, that's going to be it, everybody. I want to thank y'all so much for being on with us today. Have a great rest of your day. Hey, 5 o'clock, we're going to have the rapid fire with Vince and Sean. They're going to talk about, obviously, a little bit about this Reese stuff. And then at 8 o'clock, Ryan and I will be live, 8 o'clock Eastern. Ryan and I will go live again to talk about just, this move and kind of where Notre Dame goes from here, and then kind of what's next for Notre Dame. And then we'll go from there. So have a great day, everybody. We'll get here with you all here very soon on the Irish Breakdown podcast.